Alright, hello everybody. This is Antonio Wolf, AW, here with Hyperion and Rain. The Hegelian trio, we'd be the quad if either Tree or Josh were on, but Tree's been pretty tired these days, and I don't know what the fuck Josh is doing. I think he started college already, but even then, that doesn't excuse him because he doesn't do anything. But anyways, I'd like to read the SEETEE Mind by Gotthard Gunther. Gotthard Gunther was a German Hegelian cyberneticist. As far as I know, he rarely talks explicitly about Hegel, but you can totally tell that he's doing Hegel in much of what he does. Unfortunately, most of what he has published is not in English, it's in German, which should incentivize me to learn German even more. There's just so much good untranslated stuff in German, and it sucks that my laziness is not allowing me to read it. I'll get on that at some point, at least learn German enough to be able to read it. Probably not speak it, but to read it and hopefully listen to it. But anyways, the SEETEE Mind is an interesting little essay. It's about 25 pages long, 4 parts, and a significant chunk of it is the question of what would a truly alien mind look like on cognitive terms. You know, what would it mean for such beings to have an incompatible mode of just not just experiencing the world as in, oh, what if we see red and they see blue, but what if like thought is just completely other. So this should be interesting. Everybody knows that I very much like the topic of aliens. I like the topic of Hegel, and so you can guess why I want to read it. Let's get on with it. The SEETEE Mind, a challenge to modern logic. Modern logic may have begun with Aristotle, but it will not end with him. For 2,000 years, Aristotle's two-valued system has been so engraved? I think that would be engraved upon our mind that any other way of thinking is difficult and painful. A fact is either true or false. Can there be any other possibility? In a pre-atomic universe, perhaps there couldn't, but now we discover uncomfortable moments when a fact may be neither true nor false, but something else. Just as Euclidean physics, which explained nothing, had to yield to Einsteinian physics, which once grasped is self-evident, so two-valued logic must yield to three. So he liked three-valued quantum logic. The series of articles initiated here by Dr. Gunther, eminent metaphysician, are genuinely trailblazing. Most of what he offered as the last word in science is a rehash of stuff old to any conscientious researcher. This material is new, the first new concept in 2,000 years of philosophical thinking. Trying it on my own hurt like a pair of new shoes, but once broken in you will find it more serviceable, and you may never think in alternative values again. The editor. Well, Mr. Editor, I think you had a couple typos.
But like how it's just the editor.
But I can at least read it. Hey, you know, I'm pretty sure this person did it for free. Thank you. You did us a service before Google Translate was around, and you probably still did better than Google Translate. So, part 1 of 4. You must have wondered what would happen if a terrestrial spaceship traveling to some distant portion of our galactic universe were to encounter strange beings with absolutely alien minds. How would the two parties react, and how would they establish communication, if any? We meet people with supposedly alien mentality even on this planet. You have only to make a world tour to see the Pygmies in Equatorial Africa, the Weddas in Ceylon, or the Dravidian races in India. But it's easy to talk to a Dravidia. If you know Tamil, Canarese, or any other of the Dravidian languages. Some people draw the line even closer. I know a Texan for whom all non-Texan inhabitants of the United States are beings with foreign tastes and alien minds. But even a Texan can walk to a New Yorker, if he wants, can talk to a New Yorker, if he wants to. And if you want to talk to a Dravida, you buy yourself a Karenese grammar and dictionary book. You'll get along somehow. Misunderstandings can be corrected and are sometimes amusing. I recall once in Italy when I wanted cold water and ordered the waiter to bring me acqua caldo. He returned with a pot of warm water. I shook my head and repeated,
Cut out.
yeah, hold on, sorry. It's just, I think the power went out in my room. But it's fine, I'm on battery. He brought me steaming... sorry. He returned with a pot of warm water. I shook my head and repeated, caldo, caldo. He brought me steaming water. When I refused again and shouted, caldo, at the top of my lungs, I got boiling water. A look in the dictionary told me that acqua calda in Italian means warm water. Cold is freddo, frigid. Did not know that. Although in Spanish...
He wasn't good at picking out the pattern.
Yeah.
Like, it went from warm to, like, hot, and he thought the same word was going to, like, not make it even hotter.
That's interesting. Yeah. Okay, in Spanish... in Spanish is the same kind of relationship, and I didn't even remember that. I haven't heard that word in a long time, decades. Caldo. Yeah, caldo is scalding. Such mentalities are not alien at all. They produce identical thoughts, but convey them by different languages. Human ideas are the same everywhere on this planet. Only the vocal and written expressions of them are different. That is why we use the general term mankind. Man is spiritually of the same kind, wherever you find him on this planet. Incidentally, though the modes of expression might differ to a far greater degree than they do amongst people of our world, the minds acting behind the alien system of expression might still be the same as ours. Murray Leinster's fine story, First Contact, describes the encounter between a terrestrial spaceship and an alien vessel from unknown regions of our galaxy. The members of that alien crew possessed bodies physiologically unlike our own. They saw by heat waves and breathed through gills. Moreover, they were unable to produce vowel and consonant sounds in vocal speech. They communicated instead by frequency modulation of variable wavelengths. Consequently, any language communication went directly from brain to brain without the help of any acoustic, tactile, olfactory, or visual medium. This poses quite a problem for translation, but as this system of frequency modulation with variable wavelengths is still a language system, even though of non-terrestrial origin, the problem is simply one of translation and is fundamentally no different from translating Shakespeare into German or Newton into Chinese. Leinster takes care to point out that the intellects behind the two different systems of communication, terrestrial and non-terrestrial, are basically the same. During the attempts to establish communication, Leinster writes, one terrestrial crew member essayed a mild joke. It had to be translated into code numerals, then into cryptic groups of shortwave frequency modulation impulses. These went to the other ship and into heaven knows what to become intelligible. A joke which went through such formalities would not seem likely to be funny, but the aliens saw the point. There can be no doubt that if people enjoy the same jokes, their mentalities must be structurally identical, and only the mode of communication differs. Leinster finds this issue important enough to bring up again at the end of his story. Before the two spaceships part, an alien reports to his own skipper, "You see, sir, we spent those 2 hours telling dirty jokes." This is fairly profound. Only if two intelligences are akin to each other down to the very root of procreation are they really alike. Obviously, the aliens in Leinster's story are alien in the same way as the Dravidas are to us or a New Yorker to a Texan. Actually, they belong to a larger cosmic concept of mankind because they are spiritually the same kind as the terrestrial man and form together with him a greater community of rational life within our universe. This raises the interesting question. May we ever encounter rational intelligences of extraterrestrial origin which do not belong to that greater community of cosmic mankind? Intelligent beings outside of that community would have a truly alien mind. In such a case, more than the system of rational expression and communication would differ. Even the Even the mind activating its language would be different and capable of producing thoughts which mankind, never having conceived, could never grasp in all the future history of our universe. Understandably, the author of this article knows no more about the existence of such alien intelligences than anybody else. It is still possible, however, to answer the question of whether, theoretically at least, the existence of such alien minds is possible, and if the answer is affirmative, as it will be, how such a mind must differ from our own. To find out whether the existence of genuine alien intelligences, so alien that mere language translation would never establish a common understanding, is theoretically possible, we must first ask the following question. What are the basic conditions of existence for the human mind and all the other hypothetical extraterrestrial minds which follow the same rational system of thinking as we do? The answer is simple. In order to work and to recognize the world intelligently, the mind must, in its own structure, repeat the basic properties of general physical existence. Let me illustrate. If our world contained only two colors, green and blue, and if our retina could react only to the colors red and yellow, then we would not perceive our surroundings at all and would have no perception of what they are really like. In order to obtain true knowledge, our eyes must repeat the objective properties of blue and green. Let us generalize from this and switch from the specific color situation to the comprehensive relation between general physical existence and the human mind. Everybody knows that the world is made up of matter. If you have more detailed knowledge, and readers of science fiction usually have, then you know that matter consists of elementary particles, protons, electrons, neutrons, and positrons. To these we can add photons, gravitons, neutrinos, and many others. The number of these particles is not important for us. However, what is important is that all these particles, and any as yet non-corpuscles, display three fundamental energetic properties. They carry either a positive electric charge, a negative charge, no charge at all. It stands to reason that if the human mind produces its knowledge by repeating the basic properties of the world around it, it will also repeat in its own brain mechanism the energetic qualities of physical existence. Consequently, our brain is made up of a system of neurons that are equipped for two, and only two reactions, a positive and a negative one. Now, don't stop my argument with the objection that if physical existence has three fundamental energy states, then the repeating neurons of the human brain should be capable of three reactions. There's a flaw in such reasoning. Our mind is supposed to repeat the basic qualities of physical existence. These qualities are energetic. There are only two definable ones, positive and negative charge, and there is a third electrically undefinable one, no electric quality at all. Manifestly, while our brain can, in its functions, repeat definite qualities, it cannot repeat no quality in any definite way. This is why consciousness judges matter as impenetrable. There's something in matter the mind does not repeat. That is why the metaphysician says that the very core of matter is transcendental. Our organic brain repeats in its own functional organization the two active properties of physical existence. That is, a first and physical repetition. But if we observe the rational laws according to which our brain works and describe them in a theory of logic, we repeat this basic structure of physical existence a second time in one consciousness. We say then, our intelligence works with basic concepts of thought which have two fundamental qualities. They are either positive or negative, true or false, objective or subjective, individual or general. These alternatives may be continued endlessly, and they are referred to when we say that human minds use a two-valued logic. These two values, no matter what you call them, repeat in their turn the on and off positions of the neuronic switches in our brains. One could also call them neurotic. The latter repeats, as we point out before, the positive and negative electric charge of the particles of which our physical world is composed. We can see that all rational beings, terrestrial or galactic, must necessarily have the same brain structure and use the same logic if they face the same universe and are physically composed of the same matter. The two-valued logic, which corresponds exactly to the structure of physical existence as we know it, is Aristotelian logic. All rational beings, provided they inhabit our universe, are therefore Aristotelian intelligences. If we meet a foreign race, let us say in the neighborhood of the Crab Nebula, the difficulty of translating their language may be technically extreme. Nevertheless, the task will not be impossible because the mind which functions behind any bizarre pattern of language is still the same as our own. It is two-valued and follows precisely the rational laws that govern the terrestrial mind. Our friend from the Crab Nebula may have tentacles and breathe through gills, but his mind will follow Aristotelian patterns just the same. His is, spiritually speaking, the same kind as terrestrial man. The philosophic concept of mankind is not confined to terra. It comprises all rational beings in a universe that is composed of one single type of physical matter. This, however, is but half the story. There exists a theoretical possibility of contra-terrene matter, SEETEE, or, for convenience, SEETEE. Contra-terrene, it's just a weird way of saying it. Contra-terrene matter is a state of material existence where the elementary particles have reversed their electrical charges. Electrons, which are known to have negative charge in terrene matter, will carry a positive charge as they belong to SEETEE matter, and protons would display the properties of negative electricity if they occur contra-terrene form. Forms of physical existence. Rational beings living in a SEETEE world must have a SEETEE organism and a brain with reversed neuronic reactions. As their logic repeats the functional characteristics of their brain matter, the thinking of the hypothetical SEETEE intelligence must be determined by an inverted system of logical values, where in Aristotelian thought processes the positive logical value is attached to a certain concept. A SEETEE being must treat the same concept as negative, and where the terrene minds use negations, the beings from a contra-terrene world will introduce positive terms of thought. The SEETEE mind is the total contradiction of the terrene mind. It is two-valued too, but it is contra-Aristotelian. This reminds me of a certain inverted world, or as the British like to call it, the topsy-turvy world.
And the same thought, I was thinking inverted world.
Let us ignore the fantastic physical difficulties of ever meeting SEETEE intelligences, but if we succeed in contacting a SEETEE race, no mere language translator would be adequate. SEETEE jokes would not be our jokes, and SEETEE logical conclusions would not have a validity for our mind. In addition to the language translator, we would need an infinitely more intricate gadget, genuine thought translator. The SEETEE mind would be based on total reversal of logical values. We are all familiar with a so-called partial reversal of logical values. This is a tacit way of saying that we are all liars when the occasion demands it. In practice, the logical values are true and false. In a statement, if I replace the true predicate with its negation, the statement becomes false. 5 minutes ago, the telephone rang. I did not wish to be interrupted. Since I am able to imitate little girls' voices over the telephone, the party at the other end was greeted by a child's voice. Mr. Gunther is not in. This, of course, was a plain case of a lie. Pardon me, of reverse logical values. The positive predicate was replaced by its negation, not in. The being with the contra-terrene mind is, in relation to us in on-truth conception, the absolute liar. But don't jump to conclusions. It may be relatively true that if you ring the bell and the SEETEE butler in a SEETEE world tells you that Mr. So-and-so is not at home, he is sitting right in his study and expecting you to come in. Such a simple case is exceptional, and your own experience in lying makes simple to find out what is for you the true statement. But if things become a little more involved, you will not be able to keep up with the statements of the SEETEE butler. The reason for this is that we are only partial liars and use only unconnected simple alternatives when we intend to make a false statement. The interrogation technique of the police is based on the fact that we are only capable of incomplete lies. Our statements are always an inextricable mixture of true and false terms and therefore logically inconsistent. The SEETEE mind, so far as we are concerned, is the complete inconsistent liar. All his statements are, judged by terrene standards, untrue. Truth, however, is more systematic consistency than anything else. It is the total absence of contradictions. The lies of a contra-terrene intelligence are true to a SEETEE being as long as they do not contain inherent contradictions. They do not deny each other. They simply deny our terrene viewpoint. I once discussed this question in a course of formal logic at a New England college. A bright young thing in the classrooms... thing. Of course the British aren't people. A bright young thing in the classroom said, Oh, it must be easy to adopt an alien mentality. If I never forget to lie, I shall actually be thinking in terms of a non-human intelligence. You are mistaken, I said. The question is not whether or not you forget to lie, but whether you actually know the consistent lie in instance. What, for instance, is the exact reversal of logical values in the statement, this color is green? It is not green, of course. We all know that. But what is not green? Is it orange, red, blue, yellow, or what? As this case is still very simple, I happen to know the right answer which would be given by the total liar. It is, this color is purple. You would know this if you knew your Goethean color wheel. This is the only answer which will not involve you in contradictions, but to find it you will have to have a very specific knowledge about our color system. In order to lie about everything consistently, you would have to know all about everything. This, however, is the prerogative of the divine mind. To know that purple is the logical opposite of green, you need only know enough about one single system, that of color. The task of finding a SEETEE predicate becomes impossible for any human being if the array of negative predicates that contradict a positive statement is distributed over an unknown number of systems with different semantic characteristics. You want, for instance, to obtain two complete statements, one in terrene and one in counterterrene terms. The array of predicates is as follows. The defendant is guilty, not guilty, fat, lean, stupid, intelligent, Republican, Democrat. Now the statement, guilty, fat, intelligent, Republican, may be the terrene viewpoint. Then it seems that the counter-terrene series of predicates is not guilty, lean, stupid, Democrat. This, however, is a serious mistake. Unless we know all the predicates for the terrene viewpoint, we cannot establish a single predicate for the SEETEE mentality because one as yet unknown terrestrial predicate might cancel out any of the alternatives. Let us assume one of the later predicates, not in the above array, to be Russian. This would automatically cancel the alternative, Republican, Democrat. There ain't no such animal in Russia, but as we will never know all the predicates that are implied for a certain sentence by terrene mentality, it is impossible for us to establish even one pertinent predicate that belongs to the contra-terrene intelligence. The difficulty is that the series of possible predicates implied by a single statement is infinite, and to find the negation of a whole series you must first negate each predicate individually. This is patently impossible. I do wonder, what is the logical opposite of Russia?
France. I had the same concern. I was like, because he talked about the Mr. Gunther sentence, and I was like, what's the opposite of Mr. Gunther?
Yeah,
it seems like
you gotta find
some things are like descriptively particular, like utterly particular is like the point of them, like the name of your cat or something like that, where it's supposed to refer to something utterly individual. At which point it's like, so if we wanted to invert that, do we say like utterly universal? I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to handle those.
Yeah, if the logical structure was inverted, even this example would be like too limited, because then maybe their mental structure is also completely inverted, like they're a hive mind, right?
Yeah.
So this is patently impossible. It follows that all negations are indefinite and equivocal. This is amusingly illustrated by the famous proof of medieval logician that a cat has 3 tails. It goes as follows. No cat has 2 tails. One cat has 1 more tail than no cat. One cat has 3 tails. The infinite range of possible negations of a single statement is demonstrated by the fact that you could prove your case for any number of tails, because it is equally true that no cat has 7 or 700 tails. A similar problem of negation is illustrated by the following anecdote. An irate reporter once wrote, "Half the members of our parliament are imbeciles." He was taken to court, and the judge ordered him to publish a retraction of his statement. He next wrote, "My previous statement is untrue. Half the members of our parliament are not imbeciles." It's pretty good. What I want to emphasize is this. The capacity for logical negations which we possess does not carry us across the immeasurable gulf that exists between an Aristotelian mind and an inverted Aristotelian intelligence, and no other type of alien mentality can possibly exist in terms of our present understanding of the nature of matter. The SEETEE mind is the only physical possibility. Its whole range of thoughts would be a total negation of our thoughts. However, we can never reach that hypothetical SEETEE mind by negation of our thoughts, because any negation we perform remains partial and therefore equivocal and indefinite. Our negations simply remain inside our own terrene range of thought. We are not capable of that radical step of total negation which carries across the gulf from the Aristotelian to the contra-Aristotelian mind. No rational being can consciously perform a total negation, because in order to perform it, the intelligence in question would have to negate not only all its statements, but in addition negate the existence of its own mind. This radical reversal would be meant as suicide. Total negation, then, is that which not only negates all the contents of a certain mind, but also the mind itself. In fact, total negation is the logical definition of death. Our instinct of self-preservation only prompts us to minimize negation and to split them up into the weaker form of negative statements. For instance, a restaurant diner orders a cup of coffee without cream. The waiter returns saying, "Sorry, sir, we are out of cream. How about a cup of coffee without milk?" The diner implied that he wanted neither. This is the stronger negation. The waiter split it up into two weaker forms. It is absolute death that separates the terrene Aristotelian from the contra-Aristotelian SEETEE mind. The conclusion seems unavoidable that the twins shall never meet. But this issue is not quite settled. The purpose of this article was to demonstrate that no direct contact between such minds is possible. No contact, that is, between a terrene and a contra-terrene ego in which the Aristotelian self intuitively recognizes the spiritual alter ego of the SEETEE mind. But what about the mechanical brain as a mediator? This brings us to a technical problem. Would it be possible to design a mechanical brain on the basis of a three-valued logic which would contain the Aristotelian and contra-Aristotelian viewpoint as subordinate elements of a specific robot logic? This necessitates an analysis of the idea of the three-valued non-Aristotelian logic. That will be the subject of my next article, Aristotelian and non-Aristotelian logic. So what do you think about that thought experiment?
My first thought is the SEETEE mind should just be identical to our mind, because if it's supposed to be like a total negation, or like an exact opposite totally opposite, like of totality, it's the opposite of my mind, but my mind is such that there is an opposite of my mind. Therefore, their mind must be such that it is without an opposite. Therefore, it must be my mind. So it'd have to be identical.
Well, yeah, I mean, I disagree with his point there about because this categorical confusion could only work for the senses. If they invert the categories, at least from a Hegelian standpoint, the inversion means nothing, because all the categories are always already inverted.
Yeah.
So, if what they mean by difference is identity, all we need to realize is indeed that that's the inversion going on. And that the inversion functionally will work the same no matter what. Simply because the way the logic works is that these end up being mutually constituted moments. And so you could, in the language game that he's playing, in any immediate context, there's no way you could possibly just intuitively decipher it, because you'd have to learn the context of what's being talked about. And as far as the sense inversion thing goes, for example, there's many things in which we're not quite sure what the hell the sense inversion would be. There's different ways in which
color is more intuitive because like you can look at a color wheel and you can see the opposites and stuff like that. Kind of intuitive to imagine a inverted color experience, or even just like negative images, right? Negative images are pretty much an exact inversion of a color value, if I remember right. So they'd have those horrible nightmare negative visions. But for touch, I don't even know if that makes sense for touch, because like touch seems more intimately connected with the actual materiality of the thing. Like I'm no expert on exactly Galilean analysis of the senses, especially or particularly like how senses like touch connect with the rest of materiality. But it does like like the resistance of my wall. If I press on my wall in an inverted world, it should be or something like that. I should press right through it. But because touch is connected to the physicality of your actual hands and stuff like that, it shouldn't be able to invert in that way. Like I don't think tactile sensations are invertible.
I would say I would agree with that because there are points in which the opposite is just the same thing itself. Like for example, the opposite of a commodity is a commodity.
I'm not good enough on Marx to follow that one, sadly.
Because logically, the commodity is that which exchanges, but exchanges for what a commodity? So what the commodity opposes to itself is itself.
Okay.
And exchanges with itself, and that's what the process of exchange is.
Right.
And then sure, then people say, no, that can't possibly be the case. What's opposite of the commodity is, non-commodities. Well, no, the commodity is already composed and determined within of non-commodity being. It's just use values or whatever you want to call them. The commodity at its own level is opposite to commodities. That's the world in which it deals with. In the science of logic as well, what is the initial opposite of the other is not something. The initial opposite of the other is the other. And it's only in intaking that otherness that it becomes, grasped as totality is the other of the other, and then that's something. So there's plenty of things in which I don't think the reversal would change anything at all.
Yeah. And I'm even trying to think about it for a visual spectrum. Like, yeah, I'm not sure. Like, when I say it's, or like when we were initially saying that it's like possible to like invert visuality, it just sounds doable because it's easy to picture. But what does it really mean to do so?
Yeah, vision. How the hell would you invert vision as vision? You can invert the elements of vision, but you cannot invert vision, right?
No, the inversion of vision. Oh God. Sorry, I just like picture somebody's eyes just flipping in and out. I don't know. How would you invert vision as such?
Because even if you change it, for example, suppose like, they see as they hear, so they have sonar. Functionally, it's still vision. I don't know what sonar looks like to beings. Seems they get a very specific, spatial sense, and even senses of like the texture of the spaces around them as well. I don't know if they get an internal mental image or not. It functions in a similar sense to sight.
Oh yeah, if something was relying solely on sonar, I think it would be like, this is just how I'd imagine it. It'd be like our hearing, but representational. I feel like it'd be like hearing plus representation or something like that. Because like even like visual navigation, like as a child, you have to learn to see depth and stuff like that, or like your sense of how far away things are and like guessing distance. Like all of our senses are already like represented at once within like the occurrence and use of them. I think it's like this isn't. It's like we're walking around with like our senses and an overlay of the interpretation of our senses. Except they're not really separate at all. It's just that's how senses are all the time.
Yeah,
they're just coated with intelligibility, I want to say.
Yeah, and suppose that they, instead of suppose that they heard light, which we do with machines. You can hear the sound of light. Suppose that instead of like seeing with light, they saw with sound, which is a much poorer means of sight, to be sure. And instead they heard with light. I mean, I cannot imagine sound being other than sound. I mean, it would just be the bodily modality would be different, but it would still logically be functioning the same,
Mm-hmm.
So, instead of seeing Mars, instead of seeing the stars, you would be able to somehow hear and like throughout your body, and you might have like a sensibility that is very precise. You would hear the stars rather than see them, but functionally really have what is different about that. And of course then the primary way they would relate to the world would be through sound. And one would assume that hell, even with sound we already do that, right? Sound, there is a depth to sound, there is a locality to it, so these
it has an intrinsically locational character.
Yeah, so these beings would then act in a certain way in which to us would just seem mostly normal. We wouldn't realize it's that different until we actually try to talk to them. So this complete inversion would not truly invert everything in a proper way. Like just because at least, and even on the intelligible form, it's just impossible. Like there's no way to invert it. Once you get into like the pure linguistics and grammar of it, how the hell do you invert grammar? They treat subjects as objects. We do too. They treat verbs as nouns. We do too. We switch them around all the fucking time.
Right. So I was just thinking more about this issue of like say seeing sounds or hearing light and things like that. I think the way in which your senses are structured would actually be identical. Like hearing is qualitatively distinct from seeing. But if you had a different kind of physical, so to speak, input into your sense organs so that you heard light, I think your experience would just be like chaotic ass. Like it would just suck. Like seeing sound would probably be such a vague, general, awful wash. Because I don't think sound as a medium is as precise in the way in which you'd need to like. I just suspect the physicality of them would just make for this horrible, phantasmagoric mess of an experience that would be extremely difficult to interpret.
Well, I don't think so. Because like those, even with our experiences, like the mind is great at filtering. So I think the mind would just simply organize itself to filter for what is actually relevant. Just like how things become background noise that is filtered out in our everyday experience. The mind would develop itself that way as well. And so it's totally like it's totally logically possible and intelligible to me that, for example, there may be a similar sense of colors for sound, or representationally, and that would be right in the tones and all that jazz.
Adaptation case.
So yeah, interesting. It's an interesting, interesting thought experiment. I'm pretty sure, for a regular analytic, it'd be like, yeah, okay, I go that far, but from a Hegelian standpoint, I don't think the inversion turns out to be as troublesome as he initially makes it.
Yeah.
So let's go to part 2. Aristotelian and non-Aristotelian logic. What kind of thought process should be expected of the SEETEE alien mind? There's been much talk of adding to the traditional and classical logic of Aristotle a new technique of thinking which is intended to cover a range of problems the older technique is incapable of dealing with, since the discovery of German mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss that Euclidean geometry rests on arbitrary axioms, and if you replace these axioms by a different set of assumptions, you may get a different geometry. Logicians have asked themselves whether the same might not apply to a system of logic as well. We know, about 100 years after Gauss, that this is indeed the case, and by introducing new logical axioms, we can indeed develop non-Aristotelian systems of logical calculation. Such calculi, already applied to quantum mechanics, they play a tentative part in social sciences, but their most important field will probably be in cybernetics. It is pretty well established that the human mind can think only in Aristotelian categories. Don't think so. The mechanical brains, however, will work differently and will eventually be able to think in non-Aristotelian forms of reasoning. This might have been in his pre-Hegelian days.
Yeah.
There is one specific kind of mechanical brain which will not work at all unless it is equipped with the machinery of non-Aristotelian thinking. That is the thought translator. Well and good, but what is a non-Aristotelian thought process? Obviously, to answer this question, we must first examine the classic logic of Aristotle. The discovery of formal logic is a very recent affair in the history of mankind. It hardly dates more than 2,500 years back. I think the Indians discovered it even earlier. But it wasn't. It's quite different to ours because, unlike Aristotle, they don't assume the law of non-contradiction or the law of the excluded middle. The first discovery of formal logic in ancient Greece, the so-called sophists, and by the so-called sophists, were rather like traveling magicians, or first-rate circus performers of our days. You paid your admission and watched the artist perform his tricks. He would, for instance, single out a man from the audience and address him as follows: "You admit, sir, that you have that which you have not lost?" The innocent answer was, "Of course." "Then, my friend," the sophist blandly continued, "as you never lost a tail, you must have a tail." The performer might select a woman known to be a shrew and ask her, "Madam, have you stopped beating your husband? Answer yes or no." This proved an embarrassing alternative. Among those laughing at the befuddled woman was a man with a dog. The sophist turned to him and inquired, "Is this your dog?" "Yes." "I see it is a female dog. Has she had puppies?" The proud owner of a dog affirmed it. Diabolically, the sophist concluded, "This dog has two properties. First, it is your dog, and second, it is a mother. It is a mother. Let's add up the predicates. This dog is your mother." I had never heard of this kind of shit.
You're not a professor of logic, so...
I would take a logic class with someone like this. At least it would be fun.
Like that terrible professor of logic who harassed Norm Macdonald.
Yeah.
The performers' mental gymnastics were successful because it was little known in pre-Aristotelian times that formal logic is based on a strict technique, and that the skillful logician can do amazing tricks when using or misusing that technique. Audiences today are more sophisticated and not so easily fooled. Well, no, I think they're easily fooled. They don't understand anymore, but they would be more like, you're full of shit. Now, if logic is a rational technique, it can be technically handled. This is done by the method of propositional calculus. Propositional calculus is the technique of combining logical statements according to their truth values. In order to symbolize any two statements, we use the letters P and Q. We also use the tilde, which is supposed to represent the negation, and a dot, which shall have the meaning and. We therefore read not P as non-P and P dot Q as P and Q. The letters P and Q may represent any two statements we choose. However, to work with our symbols, not or non and, we have to first fix their meaning and show how they work. This is done for the negation by the following table. P, true, 1, false, 2. Non-P, 2, false, 1, true. Ah, yes, analytic truth tables. This table indicates that if P is true and the non-P is false, and if P is false, then non-P must be true. Instead of the letter T for true and F for false, we have inserted the first two natural numbers for greater convenience. We will later develop tables for a non-Aristotelian logic, and this can be done more easily by dealing with numbers than with letters. If this table, which has given Aristotelian logic the name of it is this table which has given Aristotelian logic the name of two-valued logic. Any statement in this technique of thinking must have one of the two values. It is either true, 1, or false, 2. No third value exists. True, 1, and false, 2 are mutually exclusive. The other term, dot and, is similarly defined. And is supposed to convey a connection between two statements. When we say, the sun shines and the wind blows, the two independent statements about the sun and the wind are merged in a compound statement by connecting them through the word and. The problem now is to find out under which logical condition the compound statement shall be true. It stands to reason that the truth of the two independent statements is a question of meteorology rather than of logic. We shall therefore give them all possible truth values. We shall call the statement about the sun P and that about the wind Q. We then find the following combinations are possible. Sun, true 1, false 2, false 2. Wind, true 1s, 2 false, 1 true, 2 false. Not entirely sure of that. Problem now is to find out. The first line under the horizontal bar tells us that both statements are true. Oh, okay. According to the second line, it is true that the sun shines, but there is no wind. The statement Q is false. From the third line, we derive that P is false. There is no sunshine, but the second statement is true. The wind does blow. The last line informs us that there is neither sun nor wind. Both statements, P as well as Q, are false. It is evident that the two columns give all possible truth combinations for the two independent statements. But now let us melt these two single statements into a compound statement, the sun shines and the wind blows. That raises the question, in which of the above described cases will the compound statement also be true? We write our compound statement in symbolic form, P and Q, and now design a more comprehensive table which contains, besides the single statements P and Q, also the compound elements P and Q. It is obvious that the compound statement, the sun shines and the wind blows, can be true in one and only one case, namely if the sun as well as the wind are active. If there is no wind, then P and Q is false. If there is no sun and only wind, it is also false. The same applies if there is neither sun nor wind. In other words, if P as well as Q both have the value 2, the expression P and Q is only true if P as well as Q are separately true. By means of this table, a logically exact definition of the logical meaning of and has been obtained. This meaning is also used by the electrical calculators if they think a conjunction. By the way, the same can be done for the meaning of or in the inclusive or exclusive sense, for imply, for is equivalent to, for is compatible with, and for neither nor. There is no need for us to develop the truth tables of all these logical connectives. They can be derived from a combination of and P.Q. The table of negation and the table and together represent the whole propositional truth structure of Aristotelian logic. They are therefore sufficient basis to develop from there the entire propositional truth structure of a non-Aristotelian logic. I never understood why analytics thinks like truth tables help anything. In this case, there was no purpose for them. What he said in the statement was even clearer than the tables themselves.
I've never seen it help myself. As far as I'm concerned, it's like the explanation, like to formalize something like this, give it a logical notation and so on. In order to even understand the content in that notation, I had to already understand the subject matter as was discussed in ordinary language. And so the second part is always going to be a translation of the first part, which is in ordinary language, and it's always going to be redundant as well. And it can't clarify anything, because any clarification as to whether or not what was said above will make sense will depend on one's actual comprehension of the subject matter. And when you think these things, you don't think them in terms of a explicit logical notation. You think them in ordinary language. So it doesn't help you think any more than Hegel says this, a knowledge of anatomy helps you digest. So I don't study logic at all, personally.
Yep. I know he did it for just expository example, but it makes it seem stupid. I'm like, you had to go that long, that far just to tell me that it's only true that the sun is shining and the wind is blowing if both the sun is shining and the wind is blowing? Did nobody
it's just
realize
a tautology.
That? I think they kind of... I get why they do it, but I think they shoot themselves in the foot in seeming banal to a stupid degree. Because the whole point of the whole diagramming of these and these stupid charts is because you're teasing out arguments in stuff in which the argument is not already clear. This is regular everyday language discussions in which people aren't consciously putting forth arguments, because when people consciously put forth arguments, it's quite clear to follow in the ordinary language thing, in which so if the whole point is to tease out whether people are being consistent or not, sure, yeah, but then people, yeah, well, it's not that as a philosopher you wouldn't be dealing with people like that, or at least you're wasting your time. Unless the whole point is to prove a point to someone else, because the unphilosophical interlocutor isn't going to get the point. Unfortunately, the Socrates situation ends up going as it usually happens with the Socrates situation, which is the idiot gets mad at you and doesn't learn a thing. But anyways. So our Terran mentality is Aristotelian. There is no doubt about that, but sometimes we meet in life non-Aristotelian situations where our two-valued thinking fails to give us a proper answer. This story told by an Indian logician describes such a non-Aristotelian situation. A Maharaja who kept a large game preserve for his private amusement was constantly troubled by poachers. Losing his patience, he proclaimed that every poacher caught by his guards would suffer capital punishment. Moreover, to add spice to his pronouncement. To add spice to his pronouncement, the prince decreed that every delinquent facing execution should be privileged to make a statement. If this statement were shown to be true, the condemned man was entitled to beheading. If it proved to be false, he should be burned alive. Presently, the Maharaja's game warden caught a man shooting deer. On the day of execution, the poacher was reminded of his privilege to make a statement. Cleverly, he worded it as follows: "I shall be burned alive." This perplexed the Judiciary Committee, which was to rule on the truth of his statement. The judges were faced with an unavoidable dilemma. If we burn the poacher, then his statement turns out to have been true, and he is entitled to a beheading. However, if we chop off his head, his statement proves to be false, and he should have been burned. At latest reports, the committee was still deliberating. I never heard of that one. That's a good one.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I had a discussion with somebody probably about a month ago about liars and how the way liars are framed in analytic philosophy is utterly stupid and meaningless. You know, people are like, but what about, the statement that this sentence is false? I'm like, that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And they're like, what do you mean doesn't mean anything? I'm like, you tell me what it means. They're like, well, this sentence. I'm like, what does that mean? What does it mean, this sentence? Like, there's nothing to be true or false here. What does it even mean to be true or false? This sentence is false. What the fuck does that mean?
Nothing.
Like, if you put it in the form of a liar, like, I am a liar, I know what that means. I understand what that contradiction means. This sentence is false has no content for meaning. You're giving me a sentence of which there is no content to determine anything about.
Oh. Also, I'm back. The internet went out for some reason here, but I have data on my phone, and so I've swapped to my phone. This sentence is false. Like, for example, somebody says, I'm telling you a lie. The content is referring to them telling you what they're saying. And in this sentence is false, the sentence is talking about itself. It's just a contradiction. That's the truth of it. Like, the true thing is that sentence is a contradiction, and that's its entire content.
Yeah, but like my point against that, and that's what they want to say. Yeah, but I mean, you think about it. But think about it on like an actual grammatical level. Like, what the fuck does that mean? And also just a semantic level. This sentence. Well, how is a sentence false? It has to state something of content. It's like this form is not a form. That's an obvious contradiction. But this sentence, it just doesn't mean anything to me.
The only one I can see is a contradiction is saying the next sentence is true, the previous sentence was false. But even then, it doesn't mean anything.
So I still think with this sentence is false just on its own, it does have a content, which is the truth or falsity of the sentence. And it's just always contradictory. Its content is that it's a self-contradictory sentence.
Yeah, but there's no content.
Yeah, but that's exactly my problem. There is no content. Like, what does it mean for a sentence to be false? I mean, like, for example, what does it mean for like a proposition as proposition to be false?
Oh. What it would mean for the sentence to be false is for what the sentence is about for what it would mean is that for whatever the sentence is about, that thing has the status of being false. And given that the sentence refers to itself, the content is the sentence claim about its falsehood has to be false itself.
Right. But that only works if you sneak in.
It's a contradictory, like any other liar paradox or something like that.
No, yeah, I mean, like I understand that, but to me, that's sneaking in content when there is no content at all. Like, to me, this sentence is false. Like, you got to give me a determinate content to make that meaningful, because this sentence is like the indeterminate container. Like that doesn't mean anything. You got to make it an actual determinate thing. If you tell me I am a liar, that is a determinate statement, which is fully self-referential, and it is the ultimate liar. It's the ultimate self-reference in which, if it's true, it's false. If it's false, it's true.
Yep.
And it has perfect content.
Lying.
Yeah, and it has perfect content. It has perfect form. It is the real liar. This sentence is just a bad bad empty formalism for it.
I don't know. Like, when you have this sentence is false, that statement as a whole is, I'd say, I'm going to just call it a subject, but at the same time, it does decompartmentalize into two kind of components. The sentence as the whole sentence, and also the sentence is the whole statement is referred to by sentence in that statement, but then is false is a predicate of that part of the statement. So it seems to have a subject predicate structure in the same way, say, the liar one does. And so it would be analyzable in the same way. Like, it seems to me like it's just on par.
Nah, to me, the sentence is just a false abstraction. It doesn't work. It doesn't mean anything. Like, like my issue with it is it's not determinate. Like, if it's indeterminate, there's no meaning to the falsehood. It's like saying, well, nothing is not. Well, no shit. Well, what is it that it's not?
Gotta think about that more.
I actually have like a two long winding essays that I never have finished going over that specific issue that I have with that, in which I one, the liars are concocted. They're not true dialectics. They're just external dialectics imposed by the form. And then two, it's like the sentence version of that is just awful in my opinion. But enough of that. All right, give me a second. I'll be right back.
Okay. So if I say you don't exist, Rand, it's false. But if you then disappear from my cognition, it becomes true.
Presumably.
Ostensibly.
Alright, back. Sorry, my power went out and hasn't been back on, so I just turned it back on. Anyways, where were we? Deliberating. The difference between the sophistic trick question and the Indian paradox lies in the fact that the former questions results from the misapplication of the formal rules of veracity and logic. It is very easy to rectify them. The dilemma of the condemned poacher, on the other hand, is not solvable within the confines of the classic logic of Aristotle. Moreover, it suggests a problem that has recurred within the modern mathematical theory of transfinite sets. So far, there exists no genuine solution for it. Only some makeshift procedures have been just instituted, by dint of which it is possible to circumvent the awkward dilemma, for example, Bertrand Russell's theory of types. So far, only one thing can be said with certainty. All attempts to solve this and other logical paradoxes point in a direction which leads us away from the Aristotelian mode of thinking towards a new system of trans-classical, non-Aristotelian logic. Let's pursue the train of reasoning which the Indian paradox offers us. All Aristotelian logic is characterized by a very strict limitation. It cannot make any valid statements except about past events. Aristotle's system is, as we have demonstrated, a two-valued order of thought. Any statement subject to it is either true or false and must be judged as such. It stands to reason that the strict alternative of the two statements, "this event did take place," or exclusive, "this event did not take place," is only applicable to the past. As far as the future is concerned, this strictly dichotomic occurrence pattern does not apply. A proposition about the future has only probability value. Its final and absolute truth value remains in abeyance as long as the future remains the future. It should be added that the more a future event approaches the present, the more the probability range narrows down. But probability it remains till it passed the critical mark of the present. Until it passes the critical mark of the present. From then on, only it can be said that it has taken place. From then on only it can be said that it has taken place, or not. Now let us apply these reflections to the statement of the condemned poacher. He has stated, "I shall be burned alive." There is no way of verifying this proposition and establishing this truth value before the execution has taken place. But the execution cannot take place before the statement has been verified, since the mode of the execution depends on the truth or falsity of the poacher's statement. The vicious circle is perfect. There is indeed no genuine solution of the paradox on the basis of two valued thought processes, but let us take another look at this baffling problem. In view of this dilemma, the judges might decide that the Maharaja's stipulation does not apply to this case and consequently accord this prisoner an entire different treatment. That might be anything from hanging to dismissal of the case and the prisoner's release. As long as the future is concerned, there now exist three distinct probabilities. One, burning, two, beheading, three, something else. It follows a strict alternative to the two-valued logic of to be or not to be. It follows that the strict alternative to the two-valued logic, to be or not to be, does not adequately cover the pattern of future events. Therefore, we need at least a three-valued logic, and any statement about the future should be phrased according to the laws of such a non-Aristotelian system of logical thought. It should be understood that a genuine third value must represent a total rejection of the alternative represented by the other two values. In Aristotelian logic, the two values, true 1 and false 2, mutually reject each other individually. Therefore, prisoner and judges alike are caught in the vicious circle. In a three-value logic, there exists an additional rejectional relation apart from the mutual rejection of any two values. The following diagram might help. We add to our classic value a third value. As this value rejects the preceding alternative of true and false, and so to speak displaces them, we shall call it the displacement value and designate it with a number 3. But what does this number mean? Don't try to understand it. I, the professional logician, do not know either. We don't have to. As we will later see, that becomes a function of the mechanical brain. The following triangular pattern of the values is only meant to show you the increasing complexity of a three-valued relationship of logical concepts. We then discover an interesting sequence of values. First, 1, I shall be burned, is rejected, and we proceed to 2. Then 2 is rejected also. In a two-valued logic, this would inevitably lead us back to 1, and we would have entered the vicious circle. But now the situation is different. Apart from the mutual negation, rejection of 1 and 2, there now exists an analog relation between 2 and the new value 3. That means there is a logical choice for our argument. It can either be from 2 to 1, thus completing the two-valued paradox, or it can also proceed from 2 to 3. In fact, this latter course is exactly what will happen. It will happen for the following reason. 1 has already been rejected, and 3 has not, so far as our paradox is concerned. In other words, 3 now occupies a position of logical preference. But what does 3 really mean in terms of our Indian paradox? According to our convention, 1 indicates the burning, 2 stands for decapitation. In order to find out about 3, let us take another look at the diagram. If we do so, we shall discover that 3 does not only reject 2, it also rejects 1, and is in turn rejected, negated by both classical values. This produces an entirely new rejectional relation. 3 not only rejects 1 and 2 individually, it rejects, moreover, the whole alternative, which is represented by the mutual opposition of 1 and 2. To put it differently, 3 not only rejects the contrasting features of 1 and 2, it also negates that which the first two values have in common. Burning and beheading indicate different choices of capital punishment, and since 3 rejects the alternative of 1 and 2, it negates not only the individual instances of burning and beheading, but it rejects their common denominator, capital punishment. Okay. I'm not quite getting like what's special here on a like semantic conceptual level. Like I get the formal relationship, but I don't see how that's like an alternative to truth and false.
I don't know. It seems more like they've introduced just rather than like this isn't introducing something over and above true or false. It sounds like they've added just a third option besides burning and beheading to their choices.
Yeah, I mean that's how I see it.
Yeah, so they're not affecting the logic. They've affected the question.
Yeah, I would say so. So, it is logically impossible, therefore, that 3 might mean hanging. This is implied by the first and most basic law of any 3-valued logic. First, find out what the common denominator of the first 2 values is. In other words, the general basis upon which they negate each other, and then deny this very basis. But you might well ask, is it always possible to determine the common denominator? You are quite right. That is where the difficulty comes in, and why 3-valued logic is a matter for somebody else, but not for us. There must be some reason why we humans use Aristotelian logic, although it has a very limited scope and cannot deal with certain problems. I mean, like, sure, like for example, in the formalism that he shows, we can see there if we want to project it, the negation or negation. 3 negates 1, it negates 2 as well. And then it negates their mutual negation, which is upon the ground of, their shared relationship. That shared relationship, I would say, it's probably their particularity. So it's the universality negates each individually and then negates their particularity generally as well. Which at least in Hegelianism means something, but as far as he's putting it here, doesn't reach that level of content. Let us go back once more to our Indian paradox and try to find out why this is so. We noted that the common denominator for burning and beheading was supposed to be capital punishment. But why not just punishment? It should do as well. In this case, the third value would represent non-punishment, and the prisoner might expect a complete pardon. But why not generalize even more and simply say, some action by the committee? This might lead to a bonus for the poacher or even a reward for having pointed out an essential flaw in the directive of the Maharaja. In fact, there is no limit to this trend of generalization. We might as well go to the limit and say that the common denominator of burning and beheading is that both are events in the world. However, as the 3 value negates the common denominator, we should arrive at the idea of no event as last solution. But where does that leave the judge or the prisoner? Neither of them could ever go home, because that too would be an event. This clearly shows that there is no point in us adopting a 3-valued logic, because it works only if the scope of the alternatives that are used in its system are arbitrarily limited. On the other hand, a logic misses its purpose altogether if it does not permit us to produce statements of any degree of general validity. There is one alternative of absolute generality the human mind is capable of. It is contained in Shakespeare's famous line, "To be or not to be, that is the question." Undoubtedly, that line contains the most radical 2-valued alternative that could be thought of. Let us try to add the positive value of being and the negative value of not being, a third non-Aristotelian value. We know the procedure now. First, we have to find the common basis for being and not being, and then reject the same. The ensuing result should provide us with the meaning of the third value. But what is the common denominator of being and not being, that is, of something and nothing? There are obviously There obviously is no common basis. You may rack your brain till doomsday. You will never find a mysterious essence that being and not being have in common. They are total negations with no common bond. Hegel would disagree. To be or not to be, that is the final question that takes precedence over everything. The comprehensive scope and the generality of Shakespeare's alternative can never be surpassed. There is, therefore, no third value on that level. The two-valued Aristotelian logic reveals itself as the most general form of thinking of which the mind is capable. In my first article, The SEETEE Mind, I have demonstrated that man is incapable of thinking except within Aristotelian logic due to the peculiar energetic, electric qualities of physical existences. The present article shows that there are also purely logical reasons which confine terrestrial intelligence to the two-valued pattern of rational thought. Yet we have seen that even in human existence, there are certain situations and aspects which are not covered by the Aristotelian mode of thought. The Indian paradox demanded a three-valued, non-Aristotelian technique of thinking. It is evident that such a technique exists, but we were not able to fit it systematically into our habits of reasoning. The possibility of many valued non-Aristotelian systems of logic is to date a scientifically established fact because the various calculi which would correspond to the mental activities of a non-Aristotelian intelligence have already been worked out. Still, the spiritual, rational life of man does not conform to non-Aristotelian patterns. This too can be accepted as an established fact. Obviously, somewhere, something is missing in our present conception of the relation between man and cosmos. The mystery deepens if we reflect upon the possible opposition of Aristotelian and contra-Aristotelian mind. My preceding article developed the thesis that a SEETEE mind would represent a total negation of our own. Let us try to follow that argument a bit further. Shakespeare gave us the formula for the total opposition of the two values. It is the disjunction of to be or not to be. If that is so, then all our rational concepts define being. Reversely, all concepts in a contra-Aristotelian mind should designate not being. Even more, the SEETEE mind is for us not being. All right? If something does not exist, why should we go to any trouble about it? I am afraid we must, because there's an awkward twist to the matter. What we have just described is the one-sided terrestrial viewpoint. Seen from the contra-terrestrial angle, the shoe is entirely on the other foot. For the SEETEE mind, only contra-terrestrial mentality represents being, and Aristotelian thought pattern is the deer index of non-existence. I would say, I think that was clear index of non-existence. The relation is mutual. The Aristotelian and contra-Aristotelian mind simply do not exist for each other. But somehow they must coexist. If contra-terrestrial matter is a physical reality, the reason is obvious. A mind may ignore the existence of another mind, but terrestrial matter cannot ignore the physical reality of contra-terrestrial matter if both happen to collide in space. Then the whole show goes off with a bang. You certainly cannot expect more positive recognition of one's own total negation. Therefore, if SEETEE matter exists, then the reality of the contra-terrestrial mind is also implied. We shall probably never contact the SEETEE mind physically because between its realm and ours yawns an existential void where only mutual self-annihilation of physical matter governs the rule of a possible encounter. But there exists a third in this creation beside matter and the energetic mind. It is information. Information can bridge the cosmic gulf. This, however, demands the design of a brain that stands halfway between the terrestrial and the contra-terrestrial intelligence. Only a robot brain could do that. An artificial brain with a non-Aristotelian thought pattern. A brain of that type is theoretically possible. My next article will explain how this works. Oh, well, that was a refresher on analytic philosophy. Truth tables and all. Although I am interested in where he's taking this, because he says, okay, we've kind of shown that it's also doesn't really seem systematically workable to have a three-valued logic, because that doesn't, the third value would not. It would not be possible to determine the specificity of just what is to be denied of the ground of the value 1 and 2. Nonetheless, we must have it Part 3 of 4. The soul of a robot. Can man build a better brain than his own? No. Well, maybe.
Than my own? No. Can I build something better than mine? No.
I mean, before we get into this, my suspicion is that though we don't know how, it doesn't seem to me impossible. It just doesn't seem to be possible that it would be
What does better
meaningful.
brain mean?
At a higher level. Okay, like, okay. So at a higher level of ontological being, no. I categorically deny that we could do that. We can't build a better mind than the human mind, simply because all we could build is either an equal or an inferior mind, and the only things we could improve about it are, quantitative. Hey, it can see more shit than we do.
Oh, the quantitative thing.
Yeah, we can see more shit, or it can see more shit than we do. Okay. It can compute things faster.
Faster memory.
Yeah, it can store more. It can access it faster. It's more reliable. Sure.
The problem is, you can't build that. Brains are born and grown. So literally the only way to, they have to make themselves. Like, you can't actually produce an artificial brain. It's ontologically impossible. You'd have to build wombs and and you'd have to get genetic material. And by the time you've done that, you've actually created you just can't do that externally. You have to have sex and stuff.
For example, can we create an artificial intelligence that has a genuine conscious mind? No. There's no way. Just from pure machines, no. Now I think we might be able to hijack a couple neurons to form the transcendental apperceptive core, and then we might fashion the parts of the mind mechanically. That's kind of where artificial intelligence is right now, where what we have is the rudimentary elements of the cognitive faculties, where we have something that has it's beginning to have the rudimentary aspects of sight determinations, sound determinations, hearing determinations, all these things. We're literally developing the senses right now, and then there's a certain level of just a formal syntactic relationship of meaning, which is not really meaning. The machine has no notion of meaning. It's just it can follow. The patterns can be codified.
You reckon they have artificial or mechanical apparatuses that replicate the patterns of the senses or something like that?
That's what for example, visual recognition AI does, and the way it does it is literally it cannot do it through understanding. It has to do it through the backwards function of reason, giving it the parameters of the form, and then the thing's understanding is just the representational comparison of information.
I see what you're saying. I'd like to say that the kind of processes you just mentioned are metaphorical, because it never achieves a whole.
It doesn't have any
It's a bit like
notion.
saying an abacus calculated something when you slid the numbers across manually.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's no cognition going on. There's a forced cognitive process mediated by us, but the thing has no cognition. The thing, like these things, cannot even they can't achieve the capacity of recognition of a fucking like 1-year-old. You know, you have to train them for very specific things. They cannot. They don't even have the capacity of general sight recognition. You know, you got to train it like to recognize boxes, and then that's all it could recognize, and it still fails. You know, in things that no human would fail at, just simply because it's not a true apperception, and it's not a true reasoning process. You know, it's just this formal representation, and it's not representation proper because it's just, you know, the machine isn't representing to itself anything. The machine itself
I'd go
is a
so far as to
representation.
call the technical aspects like representation and stuff like that, as projected onto mechanics, a convenient metaphor for how we understand what's happening when we think about it. But strictly, it's just a extremely specific pattern of mechanical propagation.
Yeah, it's just a very complex abacus.
Yeah. Okay. I think I'm fine with all this then.
Yeah, and so that's for, you know, insofar as that's possible.
Sorry. I just have like bad memories of having to argue with people that calculators don't actually calculate. That would be like saying that when you play Mario on your Wii knows about Mario, or like knows what jumping is and shit like that. Like it's interpreting or knows what the game's doing. When it's like, no, it's like that's just electricity being like patterned in very specific ways based on little channels and stuff like that were put there. It's like a fancy clock, wind-up clock, basically.
Yeah.
It's not calculating.
Yeah, not only that, and that's just even, it's a calculation. We can't, there's no way to program meaning, you know, which was what would be required for a true artificial intelligence, even if you wanted to make just a machinic intelligence, without, you know, intuitions or anything of that kind. You know, just a pure intellect. You can't even do that. There's no way to do it, because all you could do is to program a representation of an intellect, but you know, the machine will never have an intellect of its own.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I mean, materialists are annoyed by this because, you know, their thesis is that, you know, somehow just the mind just arises. And so, you know, it just arises in our brains. Our brains are just, you know, organic transistors. Therefore, you know, why wouldn't it happen in machines? You know, and if you have that assumption, well, I can see why one would have some kind of hope of that. But if you don't have that assumption, I don't think anyone is justified in having that assumption. There's no way to conceive it.
Yeah. One simply has to just presume the indefinite externality of mechanism. And you just literally aren't thinking of an animal if you're thinking of that.
Although, I mean, like that doesn't get away from the fact that, you know, I think we will get better and better at, you know, creating simulacra of reality in which, like, you know, people will eventually just not care about whether there is a soul to that thing that they're talking to or not. You know, they don't care. They don't care that it's conscious. It just appears conscious enough, good enough.
Yeah, that's the only thing that would actually bug me about that future is people being too deceived to understand uh, why these things aren't the same. Say the incredibly sophisticated robot or computer AI conversation partner or whatever the fuck, and like even bacteria. um, it'd just be annoying having to deal with people who thought the proof was in the pudding when they just saw this like sophisticated robot. In the same way, it's annoying now having to try and have these conversations with people all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, actually, we're talking about Blade Runner 2049 earlier. Well, at least Hyperion, me, and someone else were talking about it, and that's one of the things in Blade Runner, right? In which, at least on the level of, the AI girlfriend the guy has, she's just an AI. Like, despite the fact that how human its mannerisms are programmed to be. There's plenty of things showing you in the movie that it's just a general program. It acts the same way towards anyone because that's just its function. And yet, for so many people, that's going to be good enough for them. Because life is so impoverished.
Yeah. No, that's true even in things that aren't so on the nose, like someone cheating at a board game. Yeah, because they enjoy the appearance of having won at the board game, even though they themselves know they didn't actually win at the board game. This would be a simulation of other people actually regarding you as victorious. They're technically regarding you as victorious, but it's not but they don't have the actual knowledge of that you do, but the person will still feel satisfied with it, right?
Yep. But let's see what the soul of a robot looks like. Can man build a better brain than his own? At a recent party, the wife of a university professor approached me and asked, Dr. Gunther, if they invent mechanical brains nowadays that can do the most difficult mathematical operations, why don't they invent the brain of a housemaid? That ought to be much easier. You are mistaken, I said. Your husband teaches calculus, doesn't he? Yes. You see, if we ignore the qualities your husband has as a father, husband, and citizen, and concentrate only on his ability to teach calculus, it would be much easier to imitate his brain than that of a servant. You don't mean to say, she asked incredulously, that it is simpler to design a brain that does highly skilled work than some mechanism that would clean the house, serve at the table, and fetch the children from school? You don't need much intelligence for that. Feeling a little uncomfortable, I answered, I am sorry, but you are wrong again. In cybernetics, you must revise your conventional conceptions as to what is intelligent. From the viewpoint of the theory of the mechanical brain, much more intelligence is involved in doing the work of a housemaid than in teaching differential calculus. I shall never be invited to a party at that house again. This little conversation illustrates the general misconception of the basic idea of cybernetics. However, the intellectual misorientation toward this new discipline is not confined to the amateurs. It is rampant in scientific circles too, although there it assumes more subtle aspects. The present tacit assumption of the scientist and scholar in the cybernetic field is that the ultimate aim of the newly created science is to design an exact replica of the human brain. A greatly improved replica, to be sure, that does its thinking faster, handles more details, and is practically error-proof. Never mind the functional improvements. Structurally, it will be a faithful imitation of the human brain. To me, this seems a fundamental misconception of the general aims of the theory of cybernetics. Misorientations of this kind have frequently occurred in the history of scientific thought. Let us recall the most famous of all. For centuries, natural science was dominated by the alchemistic aim to distill the philosopher's stone. that is the proto-materia of or primordial substance out of which all things are made. This was clearly a misorientation of legitimate scientific intentions. I deny these accusations on behalf of all those alchemists in times gone by and in present times. Just saying.
Yeah.
Finally, however, a reorientation took place. Alchemy became chemistry. Present-day cybernetics is in a similar quandary and has not yet found its proper goal. It cannot be the legitimate intention of the cyberneticist to duplicate the human brain. If not, what should his legitimate aim be? To find the answer, we must look at the problem in a very unsophisticated way. No longer satisfied with the performance of his brain, man sets out to design and improve an improved replica of it. Well, once upon a time he was not satisfied with the means of locomotion which his legs provided either. Did he set out to improve upon the leg mechanism? Nothing of the kind. They don't make cars in Detroit that have 4, 6, 8, or 12 pairs of legs with a mechanism that makes them run faster than any human or animal legs would ever do. Instead, man invented a new mechanical principle of locomotion, the wheel. True, when man first became dissatisfied with his legs, he dreamed of elongating his steps. Grimm's fairy tale idea has found an extremely modest realization in stilts. But if you want to go from New York to Chicago, you won't use stilts. You prefer to take your automobile. Well, there's a certain use for walking machines, but they're very expensive because walking is a lot more complex than rolling. But the military certainly thinks that it's very worthwhile. Have you seen those, Rain? Like the mechanical quote-unquote dogs they have? Each of those things is, I think, a couple million a pop. And it's just to, they're just designed to be able to simulate what a self-balancing walking on any and all terrain is supposed to do. They've come a long way, but yeah, in order for them to be useful, we would have to get them to be bigger. I think, for example, if they could invent a mechanical horse or something, that would sell like hotcakes. Forget motorcycles. A horse can go a lot more places than motorcycles can. Contrary to some widely held prejudices, the human brain can do much better what it is built for than any of its mechanical imitations, no matter how much the latter may improve during the next centuries. Yes, I know they do their calculations much faster than I do, but so does the man who sells me groceries. On the other hand, I have lectured on the mathematic theory of transfinite sets. It would be unkind to put the grocer to that test. I readily admit, if it comes to the adding up of grocery bills and similar mental activities, you can't beat the mechanical brains, but they will never write Hamlet. Generally speaking, the brain activities will never be of the creative. Their brain activities will never be of the creative kind. Not only can the grocer, sum up the cost of groceries better than the mathematician, autists, and I don't mean this in any derogatory term, like people with autism and certain other what now are called neurodivergent brains, they have the savant phenomenon, in which we have no idea how the fuck these people calculate. It's literally speaking, it seems that they don't calculate. When some of them are asked how it is that they experience the process of acquiring the answers to the highly complex questions they're given, these computational marvels of calculation, a lot of them will simply describe no thinking process on the conscious mind whatsoever. I think the most interesting stuff I've heard of is that there's certain ones in which they describe that they see numbers before them as shapes, and that suppose you have this some number, the function of calculation and then the other number to which they're supposed to solve the equation or whatever. From one side, they see a geometric shape. From the other, on the first number, on the second number, they see another geometric shape, and they just wait until another geometric shape fills in that connection of space. And when that geometric shape appears, the number also appears intuitively with it. And that's how then they get the answers. That ain't calculation as far as I'm concerned. That's something else.
It's voodoo, yeah.
But they can calculate with the best machines. However, let us be a bit careful about that generalization. It goes without saying that our human concept of human creativity is limited to the possible range of human spiritual activity. We do not know anything about the creative power of angelic or divine intelligences. I don't know, I think I do. Or at least by the stories of other people, I think I do. Not certain of it, but on the other hand, we might say, if my readers will permit the temporary use of theological terms, that God has delegated a tiny fraction of his creative powers to us. Now, would it not be possible for us to say that man has delegated some of his own creative powers to the mechanical brain? He has delegated them in order to be used in a field in which man himself can never be creative. But where would that be? Yeah, Rain, where would that be?
Wait, where would what be?
Well, what sphere of creativity would machines be better at than we are?
They're entirely uncreative, so none, presumably.
Actually, that's not true.
The only thing, as far as a function goes, I think anything quantitative, they can do faster.
Let me push back on you that there's actually a set of interesting videos. I don't look at it very much, but every once in a while I do try to catch up what's going on in the applied AI fields, because AI in itself is not that interesting. We're still stuck in a paradigm of machine learning. There's not been much evolving of that. But as far as the applied field goes, this has shown up to be better than us in certain creative efforts. And they're all mechanical. So for example, there is now a growing industry of AI-generated blueprints for material designs. These AI can take into account information which is relevant to structural designs. For example, race cars. There's this one I watched about how they use an AI to design the structurally most sound car for the safety measures that the car should have. And so it created this spider web like frame in which then it calculated the minimal amount of web connections in the frame required to maximize both the strength and durability of the frame due to motion stresses and heat stresses based on the information they had acquired from actual racing data on cars. And then they built a thing, and it worked. It used the least material, has the greatest strength, and was developed in such a way that any attempt for humans to be able to design that through calculations would never have happened.
Right.
Yeah, and so there's just that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so there's various applications of that I've seen. So they've applied that to architectures, they're depending on just functional, and it's mostly functional on that form, in which we kind of give it some parameters to the sorts of things we want, and then we let it just go on its own to figure out what is the most optimal for the kinds of parameters we want. Even tools, there's been it's designed new kinds of tools which could be used for like handy things like tools with a better designed screwdriver or some shit, stuff like that. So it's actually proven useful in that kind of things. There's also like auto-generated 3D modeling nowadays. Like there are entire companies in which like they sell software for like generating cities, for example. Like you're designing a video game, like, well, you don't want to spend time generating every house in the city or whatever. Rather you get this stupid thing that generates a whole slew of various buildings according to various designated designs, in which like the city looks, one, realistic enough to the structure of what a city would have, and two, it also designs them as full buildings, so full rooms and decor and all the jazz inside. It textures them, like it designs everything. It designs the textures, all these things, and so you don't have to if you have something like that, you're spared the worry of like paying individual designers to do those things, and or paying what are those things that you pay for other people to buy, for you to buy the rights to use their stuff. I forget what the term for that is. So there's like there's an increase of these things as artistic aids, both in a engineering sense as well as an artistic sense, because there's a lot of senses in which I think you've linked when we first talked, you linked some stuff about the cool shit that some AIs can generate out of merging pictures and shit, and that kind of stuff helps inspire you. Sometimes it's interesting on its own, and sometimes it gives you some idea to further do shit on your own. So it's like they offer like inspirational sources. It's kind of random, but
no, I think all that stuff's fantastic. When I give my initial answer of no, I was just basically reiterating my earlier point about it's not real creativity, or like it's not real calculation, because you have to have cognitions in order to have those sorts of things. So that was just, I suppose at this point it would be pedantic to be saying something like that. In terms of dealing with, say, machine creativity like we've done now, they're excellent. There are engineering problems that seem basically unsolvable by manual human thinking. But if you get some people who put together a program and they just have a good sense of what sorts of parameters we need to have this thing checking, and then they let it run, those things can find things that would take decades of humans tirelessly and tediously keeping track of stuff and running different things, and then including which results worked and which ones didn't, and filtering. Like, you can just quantitatively it's brute forcing stuff basically. These kinds of things can brute force these kinds of, and like even have certain parameters in place for when to retract certain paths of exploration and check this one, and then have a sense for when this one's not that fruitful anymore and to try a different one. There's all kinds of great, interesting solutions to problems like that the sheer brute force mechanical quantitative powers of computers and AIs and things like that are fantastic for, and do it in a way that humans could never hope to do. That they're thinking, even with incredible amounts of aids and things to write down stuff so you don't forget and all that. And then, even artistically, I think it's wonderful how so many interesting AI aids and things like that, in terms of art production and stuff like that. I think those things are wonderful. I think it's just always good to have more possibilities. Some people are like, oh, there's too much to choose from. I'm like, yeah, that can be overwhelming, but it's kind of cool that you do. And you can self-restrict as well. And when you do that, you can self-restrict to this particular set of possibilities, and that's its own fertile creative ground. And it also, certain things getting automated, like you were talking about that city builder thing, that makes things accessible to people who are creative, but are lacking a specific skill set. So it's like maybe they have really good ideas about, I don't know, maybe they're an amateur game designer, but they're just a horrible, horrible, horrible artist, and they don't have money to hire somebody else, or they're annoying and nobody likes them and wants to help them anything, but they have this thing that can create art, or it can just take Google images, blend them so it's unrecognizable, so you can't get tacked with copyrights, and now you can have textures or whatever you need in your thing. I think there's wonderful possibilities opened up with that, and they're very good, and I think they'll get better, and I think that stuff's awesome.
Yeah, I was actually talking with DM yesterday, I think, about how I totally see it as a real possibility that within something like, say, 30 years, by the time, I'm 60, we will see like one person made movies, like CGI movies, and like one person made games, just because like those kinds of aids will be there. Just like all you have to do is like provide the basic impetus, and you'll have an AI that can generate something good enough for someone who just doesn't have the time and skill set to apply themselves to acquire all those skills and do a mediocre job of it anyways. So might as well do a mediocre job of it anyways with a cheap AI.
Right. One other fun thing about this stuff, like it can be very easy to be like cynical. Oh, the cold machine, it has no heart. The craftsmanship's not there and stuff like that. Like there's the famous Miyazaki thing where Miyazaki was so disgusted at what he saw when somebody brought in like a AI generated animation, and it happened to be one that looked like something from Silent Hill. It was just these writhing, horrible bodies. He's like, and they're like, it would be good for a horror game or a horror film. And Miyazaki was just like, I hate you, basically, is what he said to them. He said, I think you're everything that's wrong with the world, and I hate you, is the Coles Notes version of what he told them. And I'm like, I get it. Also pretty harsh. For me, I'm a bit more optimistic than that, where different AI things people have made have the mark of their maker in them. Like, because people have to, when they don't just like, oh, I threw together an AI, there you go, it's out. No, they look at it and they go, it's not doing it quite right. And then they tweak values, or they add a thing and stuff. And you end up with like a little bit of craftsmanship shining through in the kind of ways the AI will take things. And so I think there's even still a glint of taste that goes into the AIs people make. And I think that shows in the product. And even like when you're an artist, picking which AI is producing the kinds of patterns or directions you like is an element. It's like choosing a paintbrush as well. Like, I don't know. I think it's hard to actually kill creativity. The thing that seems to automate it away or blow it up, all of a sudden people notice the cracks, they notice a peculiar effect, a shining about it, and they're gonna just appropriate that. It's like water, where it'll just get into any crevice it can. Creativity is hard to repress in any real way.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like for example, some like we're close to like perfect voice modulation replication. But for example, for somebody to use something like that and to make a fully synthetic voice of what they wanted to sound, even once they get the general attributes for it, that person still has to be a literal director of the AI to get it to say things in the proper manner that they want. You have to, like, that person will have to learn because there are certain ways in which you still have to mark for the AI, put this kind of emphasis here, say this in a certain kind of way in the text. For somebody to make something like that will sound like really good, is still going to be an aesthetic labor. Just not directly done by them. It's with the aid of the AI, but it's still an aesthetic labor. It does require a vision. And it requires a director. to be executed.
That's right. This ties back to there's the longest time where people were so upset about auto-tune in music. Because again, it's just the not recognizing something new as a creative tool. And I mean, it's fair to kind of resent it a bit, where it's like every new song has auto-tune or something, or it's just being used poorly, or is like an uncreative cash-in. But nonetheless, it's still a transformative new tool. And again, the process of actually manipulating vocals with the auto-tune becomes an art unto itself. And plus, it's like, it's not like people just correcting off performances, which whatever for your studio pop album, and you want to have the just so voice, which can often be like disastrous, where it's too plasticky and stuff like that. So, but some people are like, no, I'm going to take that fakeness, that plastic, I'm going to turn that up to 11. I'm going to max that out. And now it's like you're doing something just unhuman, and that's actually the point. And it's like these things it's just more opportunities. It's hard to lose.
Yep. Let's continue this. We have pointed out in our preceding articles that the human mind works on the basis of a two-valued thought pattern. It is Aristotelian in its character, or contra-Aristotelian if it lived in a hypothetical SEETEE world, and it can never transgress its two-valued limits. That holds not only for the rational concepts of the individual intellect, but for all our irrational motives, too. Even all mysticism is two-valued. The very existential roots of man as manifested in his sex life are two-valued. There's no third sex. I think you're wrong. I think some people would say there is nowadays. Nah, I don't believe it.
A hermaphrodite? I don't know.
Nah, that wouldn't count as third sex. That's transcendental to sex.
Dun, dun. I actually haven't thought about any of that.
It's like what's it called? The androgynous.
The androgyny.
Yeah.
I think it's androgyne for that word.
So
I'm not sure though.
Wait, what?
So like a lot of people go like, oh, it's you can't tell whether it's male or female. I think like the ancient meaning of it is that it is male and female. It's like what we would think of as hermaphrodite, but it's not merely male and female. It transcends that division.
Oh, okay. I think when I thought of it, because again, we're talking about biological sex. This is about reproductive organs and stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Hermaphrodites can self-impregnate, so they basically have both gears, or both the kinds of equipment. So androgyne would be like non-genital organism, presumably.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about that. I think the most I read about that was some stuff about Atlantis.
Wait, even the non-genital. Wait, okay. Hold on. Yeah, you have a male reproductive part, female reproductive part, on a single organism with both reproductive parts. And then you could have one hypothetically, and in the case of nature, some kind of chimera or with a birth defect where without reproductive parts, perhaps. I don't know if that's ever happened, but I can discount it. I can imagine it. Just thinking if there's any other range.
Cause there is a sense of androgyny, I guess, like, or at least in what I was reading, in which like they meant it as like it just has characteristics of both sexes, but it's not reducible to either one.
Oh, biologically, I think the only thing when it comes to those should be considered is specifically contribution to impregnation or like direct reproductive moment. Because if you get into secondary sex characteristics, it's going to be all over the map. Different between like it's just going to be forever difference. Like I think apart from the opposition within whatever kind, like specific species, whatever you're dealing with. It's basically right down to the nitty gritties of which one gets the other pregnant or holds the egg or doesn't, or however that works. I think it's specific to something like that as far as sexuation.
Yeah, as far as sex goes, it's too valued as far as I'm concerned. It's not even intelligible what the third sex would be. So continue.
Yeah.
It seems very strange under the circumstances that we can calculate the laws of three-valued logic. Perhaps it is not so strange after all, since we can only calculate them, but can never employ them as our own brain functions. However, that which we can calculate we can build into machines, and here lies the proper destiny of all cybernetic science, not to build a duplicate of the human mind, but a non-Aristotelian brain that works along a three-valued thought pattern. Such a design would be creative in a very new sense of the word. It would possess delegated creativity insofar as it could produce thoughts of a three-valued structure of which man is entirely incapable. But it would have them only by virtue of the fact that man has built the necessary laws into the objective mind of the machine. The proper aim of cybernetics is not the mechanical repetition of the subjective, personal mind of man or of a contrasubjective mentality of SEETEE man, but the creation of a new kind of three-valued brain. The aim of cybernetics is the para-human brain. I shall therefore demonstrate how two basic concepts of Aristotelian logic, the negation and conjunction, and would work in the three-valued brain of a robot. Using the symbols P and Q as two related statements, the following is a table of definitions for non and as developed in the preceding article. P can be true, and not P as 2 is false, then P is false as 2, and then not P is true. Not P shall be read not P by prefixing the tilde to P. You can, as the table shows, alter the value of P from 1 true to 2 false, and vice versa. And may be defined by the table. Let's not read that table. We assume P and Q to be two statements. P equals the sun shines, and Q equals the wind blows. We've read this before. And the compound statement, the sun shines and the wind blows, is obviously true only if P and Q are true at the same time. This is shown by our table. These two tables show how the negative and the conjunctive work in the human brain. They function as indicated in the mind of any man, because our brain is two-valued and falls in the Aristotelian pattern. However, the genuine robot brain shall be considered to have three values. This makes it obvious that it must have a second negational pattern, because the negation permits us to proceed only from the value of 1 to 2 and back again, but no further. From this point on, to stick to our traditional ideas of true and false would be difficult. The reason is this: we are now introducing a third value which subtly alters the meaning of value 1 and 2 as well. What is true for the human mind is false for the SEETEE mind, and therefore has the combined characteristic: it is true and false at the same time. It is to clarify this superficial contradiction that the third value must be introduced. The complexity of the following tables, it should be noted, are not meant to be grasped by either the human, yours or mine, mind, or that of the SEETEE mind, but only by that of the mechanical brain, for which all possibilities become logically operable. The mechanical brain recognizes neither human nor SEETEE values as such. It operates only with positions of values within its mechanism. These positions are 1, 2, and 3, and in order to operate them together, we introduce a second table of negation for the mechanical brain. P2, if P is false, then not prime 3, not prime P is 3, and if P is 3 and not prime P is 2. From now on, we can proceed from value 1 up to value 3. In fact, by combining these tables, we can produce any value constellation that might occur to the three-valued logic. In order to find out what AND means for a robot mentality, we develop a similar procedure for the table of conjunction. Instead of giving P and Q two values, true or false, from now on we shall give them 3. This results in the following table. It's a table. At this point, you may ask how the new three-value number for P and Q was reached. It is really quite simple. Look again at the two-value table for the human form of conjunction. You will notice at once that we arrive at the proper value sequence for and in the human sense of the word if we always pick the highest number available in the two independent columns for P and Q. In the first line, there is only one available for P as well as for Q, so we have to take 1. But in all the other 3 lines, there's always at least 1, 2, and it is chosen according to our rule of always picking the highest value number for conjunction. Now apply the same value for the truth table for the robot. Whenever the columns for P and Q show a 3, then take it. If there is no 3, try to get a 2. And if only neither 3 nor 2 is available, place the value 1 in the column for P and Q. As it happens, this is the case in the first line only. Alright, let me see the table. So if P and Q are true, P and Q is true. If P is true and Q is false, then P and Q is false. If P is true and Q is 3, P and Q is 3. If P is false and Q is true, P and Q is 2. If P is false and Q is false, P and Q is false. If P is false and Q is 3, P and Q is 3. If P is 3 and Q is 1, 3. If P is 3, Q is 2, 3. If P is 3 and Q is 3, P and Q is 3. Okay. Makes sense enough. Thus far, we might say that the difference between the human and the robot brain, as illustrated by the important logical term "and," seems to be nothing extraordinary. One might be tempted to say that it is a difference in degree rather than in kind. As we now have 3 values with which to calculate, it stands to reason that the definition of "and" should be a little more elaborate. And nevertheless, this is an erroneous conclusion. There is a difference in kind. The human brain is able to conceive only one meaning of "and." We have given it in our 2-value table. In the first of this series of articles, we describe the concept of a SEETEE mind, pointing out the fact that a contra-terrestrial intelligence would think with a reversed Aristotelian logic. Consequently, the conjunction "and" would have an inverted logical meaning for a brain created out of a SEETEE matter. But as we humans can conceive of only one, our own meaning of "and the alien rationality remains unapproachable so far as we are concerned. On the other hand, a 3-valued robot brain is in a more advantageous position. It can conceive of several meanings of "and." We shall indicate the second meaning of "and" by 2 dots, and we repeat the preceding table with the addition of the value column for the second meaning. So if P and Q are true, P and Q are true, and then P and Q are true. P is true and Q is false, P and Q are false, P and Q is true. P is true and Q is 3, P and Q is 3, P and Q is 3. Not sure what the P and Q is meaning, at least on the second line there.
Mind your P's and Q's.
I like
you mean
peas and
like
mashed
what they
potatoes. Well, no, I mean he's already told us he doesn't know what
Yeah.
this means. It's just a formalism, but I'm trying to think about what that means.
I know. It's a joke.
Now the question is, how did we arrive at the new column of values for P and NQ? Again, the answer is quite simple. Remember, we picked the values for P and Q in the orders of 3, 2, 1. Remember also that the SEETEE mind has the positive 1 and the negative 2 values reversed compared with any other brain. Therefore, we now reverse the position of the values 1 and 2 in the order according to which we pick them for "and." In other words, P and Q is defined by the value of order 3, 1, 2. That means the preference position of 3 remains unchallenged, but wherever there is only 1 and 2 available in the columns of P and Q, we now choose 1 instead of 2. Thus, we arrive at a different second meaning for "and." This cannot be done in a 2-valued logic. If you don't believe me, try it. Okay. So it's a bullshit. That's what I'm understanding. The 2 columns for P and Q and P and Q describe the robotic and the SEETEE meaning of "and" show how both are reflected in a 3-valued mechanical brain. We humans do not think in 3-valued logical terms, but if we make special effort, we can conceive objectively what the robot means when it thinks 3-valued P and Q. But we cannot conceive of the SEETEE meaning of "and." It plainly contradicts our logic. Take, for instance, the second line of our table. There, P has a value of 1 and Q is 2, but the value of the compound statement is also 2. Translated into a non-symbolic language, this means if the sun shines but the wind does not blow, the compound statement in SEETEE language, the sun shines and the wind blows, is nevertheless true. For us, this is manifestly absurd. It illustrates my remark in the first article, the SEETEE mind, that we humans shall never be able to contact such an alien mind directly. What a counter-terrestrial being would think is sheer insanity to us. We recognize it as such, but in the sense, in the ease of the SEETEE aliens, we would not describe their brain function as thinking. But in the case of the SEETEE aliens, we would not describe their brain function as thinking. Now, I disagree. I mean, I think the example of just the inverted thought makes perfect sense, and it would not be unintelligible universally. Specifically, sure, but not universally. And, the and would be... I mean, okay, like, do you agree with me, like, that there's some... It seems to me like there's a... It doesn't seem to follow, like, okay, if we've agreed by to his example that they have a universal inversion, the and would also mean the opposite of the and. So the statement will remain true both for them and for us, and we could understand why. And he set it up in a way in which what we say would for them, as we say it, remain true, but that couldn't be the case because what we say as we say it would be inverted.
I can't take the inversion seriously, because it's an inversion of something that is supposed to not have an inversion. So its inversion should be without inversion, and so it should just be the same.
Because here, it's like the sun shines and the wind blows. It's true for us only if both of these are true, and it's false insofar as only one of them is true and the other one is false. But for the SEETEE mind, he's saying the sun shines and the wind blows is true as an and statement if only one of those is true and the other one is false. But that already assumes that we haven't inverted the meaning of the and in the first place, and we haven't inverted the meaning of the sun shines and the wind blows. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Don't buy that example. So there is but one way to get in contact with a truly alien mind, with the help of a robot mediator whose brain pattern is activated by a three-valued logic. Such a pattern has a much wider scope and can include both the inverted Aristotelian systems in a modified form. Nevertheless, a robot brain is not capable of acting as a mediator between terrestrial and counter-terrestrial mentality unless it possesses a threefold capacity of conceiving the term and, or any other term that might be relevant. Sure, I mean, if we take his standpoint, that would be the case, except he's given us no way of conceiving that this is actually conceivable, because he's only given us a formalism, but there's no conception in that. I mean, it's just symbolic algebra. So far we have learned the mechanical brain's own conception of and. It is expressed in the value column for P and Q and indicates, so to speak, the mental personality or soul of the genus robot. But this technical brain also knows the SEETEE concept of and. However, that is not enough. In order to play the part of the mediator between us and the SEETEE mind, our mechanical brain must also have a precise conception of the human idea of and. Our next problem, therefore, is to translate the Aristotelian concept of conjunction into terms of a three-valued system of thinking. This can be done as follows. In order to indicate the difference between the SEETEE and other mind, we reverse the order of the two values 2 and 1. We thus obtain the two preference orders, 3 to 1, 3, 1, 2. And further, reversal of values will provide us with the preference order for the human conception of and. The next logically possible exchange of value positions will place value 2 ahead of 3. We thus obtain 2, 3, 1 as the order in which the values are picked for the human meaning of and. We can now write down the comprehensive table which covers all possible meanings of and in a 3-valued logic. This is logically cogent. In a 3-valued logic, disjunction can be reached by negation only if you apply the operators not and not prime together. Alright, the expression P*** defines the human meaning of and. Examine the last column of values. You will find that it corresponds exactly to the Aristotelian meaning of and. We learn from the 2-valued table that and always has the value 2 whenever there is a 2 in the independent columns P and Q. Only P*** in our 3-valued table conforms to that rule. In other words, if we follow the preference order of 2, 3, 1, then the value 2 has overriding preference over the other 2 values. Each of the 3 conjunctional columns indicates a different mentality. The first conjunction represents the genuine robot mentality in using the concept and. The next indicates SEETEE mentality, seen through the eyes of a mechanical brain. And P***Q finally provides us with a meaning of the Aristotelian and, if the same is transposed into the 3-valued system of a robot brain. By the way, it is interesting to note that the robot concept of and agrees more with the human than with the SEETEE concept. In P and Q, as well as P***Q, the compound statement "the sun shines and the wind blows" is true only if P and Q, in the single statement, are independently true at the same time. This, however, is an illusion. If SEETEE intelligence had designed the mechanical brain, they would say that the robotic concept of and was similar to the counter-terrestrial idea of conjunction. P***Q, and utterly dissimilar to the terrestrial idea. It is not our business, however, to describe how this would happen. We are here concerned exclusively with the description of the situation from the human viewpoint. Please take a look at our 3-value table. In all cases where P and Q have only the human values 1 and 2, the mechanical brain agrees completely with us. It cannot and never will contradict us in all conjunctional matters where Aristotelian judgment are involved. It disagrees with us only in the case where the 3rd value is involved. This indicates that if a robot has a soul, it is different from the human. The human soul, or whatever goes under that word, expresses itself in an intense feeling of personal, indivisible identity. All our conscious life is focused in one point, the self, the I. That is why we beings of Aristotelian, or contra-Aristotelian mentality have only one negation, one concept of and, of, or, of implication, of causality, etc. A robot soul, however, would be organized differently. It would not be based on identity, but on tridentity. In other words, it could shift the personal center of its mental life and reconcile contradictory viewpoints. This would make it the proper mediator between us and the SEETEE mind. I can see why you got interested in Hegel later on. We humans are not capable of dealing with strictly contradictory viewpoints in situations involving a 3rd value. A Jewish friend of mine once told me a little anecdote which illustrates this. A rabbi once discussed the problem of the human soul with 3 of his friends. The first, being a confirmed agnostic, proved unequivocally that man had no soul at all. The rabbi said, "Oy vey, you are right." The second of the friends took over and proved equally convincing that all rational beings have souls. The rabbi nodded. "Oy vey, you are right too." "Now look here," interrupted the third. "What sort of nonsense is this? They cannot both be right." The rabbi sadly assented. "Oy vey, and you too, my friend, are right." There is in this anecdote an implication of a possible 3rd value, but we humans do not have it. The 3-valued soul is the soul of a robot. Well, we've been going for quite a bit, and it's only 7 pages left. Did we finish it, or do we leave this here?
If it's only 7 pages, just read it through.
Yeah, let's just read it through. Let's power through this thought translator. It's funny that I find myself disagreeing with this thought experiment for the robot, because I think that what he wants is obviously what we already are capable of, and he does not realize it here. Perhaps he realizes it later in his life when he encountered Hegel, and maybe he changed his mind. Part 4. The Thought Translator. A man once approached an ancient, shabbily dressed philosopher in the marketplace of Athens and said musingly, "I have often wondered why people are willing to give alms to the sick and poor, but never to philosophers who are often in worse straits." "My dear friend," the philosopher answered, "I can answer your question. If one meets a person who is poor or sick, he will always think, 'This is a thing that may someday happen to me too.' In order to placate the deities which directs his destiny, he opens his purse and heart. But if the sane man meets a philosopher, he will say, 'This man is what he is because he is wiser than anybody else. That could never happen to me.'" I do not think times have changed very much since then. In this article, I'm going to develop the basic principle of a thought translator. But if I were to go to the patent office to obtain protection against later industrial exploitation of my idea, I would certainly be refused. And what an excuse they would have. Remember the story of the fellow who wanted to have his submarine periscope designed secured by a patent? He was refused on the ground that his periscope had already been described in Jules Verne's famous novel, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Jules Verne.
Oh, Jules Verne? Okay. I'm afraid I am in the same boat. You've read Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass? Remember where Alice steps through a mirror and, well, the 4th chapter contains a description of a thought translator. Couched in fairy tale terms, the description is given as part of the story of Tweedledee and Tweedledum, and here's what you should know about it. Tweedledee and Tweedledum look exactly alike, but no matter what the first says, the other shouts, "Contrariwise." This is identical to the logical situation which would arise if two intelligent races with mutually exclusive mentalities, that is, a human-type mind and a SEETEE mind, were to meet each other. In such a theoretical situation, where the human mind is positive, the alien mind must necessarily be negative and vice versa. Accordingly, the chapter about the Tweedle twins starts out with the following significant lines. Tweedledum addresses Alice. "If you think we are waxworks, you ought to pay. Waxworks weren't made to be looked at for nothing. No how." And Tweedledum adds, "Contrariwise, if you think we're alive, you ought to speak." The alternative of mutually exclusive terms is in this case, of course, dead or alive. Any other total alternative might do as well, but they all boil down to the purely logical one. It is or it is not. Accordingly, Tweedledum informs Alice. "If it was so, it might be, and if it were so, would be, but as it isn't, it ain't. That's logic." It is logic indeed. Any logical system we can construct is always a systematic order of tautologies of the general form. If it is, then, and only then, it is. And if it is not, then, and only then, it is not. There is no doubt Tweedledee knows his logic. On the other hand, to every positive statement his brother makes, Tweedledum bellows, "Contrariwise." This obviously means that all statements made by the Tweedle twins can be separate independent systems which have following forms. It is, if it is, well, it's repeated, 1 and then 2, it is not repeated. The blanks may be filled with any logical predicate, provided the sequence of predicates is the same in system 1 and 2. Furthermore, both systems must contain an infinite number of statements. So far, our two systems seem to differ materially as to what is inside the square. But as Tweedledum and Tweedledee are exactly alike, the only way for Alice to tell them apart is to read the letter sequences, dum and D, which are embroidered on their collars. We are going to make the contents of the two systems also alike and merely mark one with a label. This is possible because if all the conditions for system 2 are given above are fulfilled, we are permitted to take the infinite series of knots out of system 2 and place a single knot in front of the whole system. Now, 1 and 2 are materially exactly alike, like Tweedledum and Tweedledee, but they are total denials of one another. This is precisely the situation in which we find ourselves if we ever meet an alien race with a contra-Aristotelian or SEETEE mentality. Direct spiritual communication is possible between different mental types only so long as their systems of thinking either coincide completely with each other or partially overlap. But all direct intellectual contact must stop if the only relation between the two systems is established by a total negation, which says there is not one positive truth the aliens have in common with us. There's only one way to establish contact, albeit indirectly, between a human and a SEETEE mentality. This is to design a robot brain which incorporates a three-valued system of logic. Our mind, let us say it is Tweedledum, and the SEETEE mind, represented by Tweedledee, mutually contradict each other in the antithesis of the first two values. But if the robot mind integrates our mutually exclusive two-valued concepts into this three-valued system, my ideas as well as those of the SEETEE mind will be interpreted in terms of a third value. However, since the human mind is Aristotelian and the SEETEE mind contra-Aristotelian, each thinking in two-valued terms, the third robotic value will be indifferent relative to the counterposition of the Aristotelian and the contra-Aristotelian system. In other words, if my ideas are transposed into the three-valued system of a robot brain, and the same takes place with the concept of a SEETEE subject, the third value will turn up in both Aristotelian and contra-Aristotelian logics in a strictly corresponding manner. That means the two procedures of thinking which are mutually exclusive in a two-valued system do overlap in a three-valued system of robot mentality. In the preceding article, The Soul of a Robot, we demonstrate how a basic logical concept like and was reflected in three different meanings of and within the mental structure of a robot. I shall repeat the necessary tables from The Soul of a Robot here. This table defines our human Aristotelian concept of and, stating the combat sentence. We've read much of that, so I'm just going to skip it. At this point, I should like to warn the reader again, as I did in the third articles of the series, not to try to think the three different meanings of and as demonstrated in the following truth table. This is psychologically as well as logically impossible. What the following table shows is the mechanical truth pattern of a three-valued robot brain. Our own mentality is not three-valued, and if it were, we would not need a thought translator. The situation can be roughly compared to the logical difference between our handling small or very large sums. We can think the result of 1 plus 1 or 1 times 1, but we cannot think $356,797,351 times 997,310,971. If we want to know the multiplication result of the two 9-digit numbers, we have to resort to a mechanical procedure using pencil and paper. I don't know, there's people who can do that in their heads. Apparently there's a trick to highly simplify.
I was just thinking they'd probably have like they could just represent like the paper and pen thing you do in their head really well. Or something akin. It's it'd be shortcutty in the same way.
Yeah, they use shortcuts for sure. I
don't know how the fuck else you
you don't actually calculate.
What would you even do if you didn't do that? Oh my god.
There's some really neat tricks. Like I've seen like some like cool tricks to like make even like triple digit multiplication mentally possible. But you do have to make the representation in your head to mechanically relate the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So our three-valued table is nothing else but the governing pattern of some sort of notational arrangement by dint of which one two-valued and thinkable concept is transformed into some other. So if P and Q are true, P and Q is true for, our logic. P and Q is true for the SEETEE mind, and P and Q is true for the three-valued robot, for the robot mind. If P is true and Q is false, P and Q is false for the human mind, P and Q is true for the SEETEE mind, and P and Q is false for the robot mind. If P is true and Q is 3, P and Q is 3 for our mind, P and Q is 3 for the SEETEE mind, P and Q is 3 for the robot mind. If P is false and Q is true, P and Q is false for us, P and Q is true for the SEETEE mind, and P and Q is false to the robot mind, and so on and so on. And when it's all 3, it's 3 for everybody as well. Whatever 3 means, we don't know. As we point out before, see my article, The Soul of a Robot, the first truth function, P and Q, represents the robotic meaning of and. It represents the thinking of proper to the mechanical brain. The truth function P and Q renders the meaning of and as it appears in a SEETEE mind, but projected into a three-value system. Finally, P and Q repeats our human concept of AND, again transposed into a 3-valued pattern. It stands to reason that in order to operate any of these tables, you need negational operators capable of transforming one value into the next. For our human logic, this is done by the Aristotelian negation not. By following the table indicates that if P has a value 1, then not P, non-P has the value 2, and vice versa. This operator is sufficient to handle the 2-valued table. However, it is not comprehensive enough to operate the full range of 3-valued of a 3-value table. It cannot perform the step from value 2 to value 3. Our preceding article has therefore introduced a second negation, and we will repeat it here for greater convenience. Its symbol is a negation prime. It is operational, and its operational power is defined by the matrix. If P is false, not prime P is 3. If P is 3, not prime P is 2. Okay, so that gives us the triangular negation of the diagram in the first essay, I think. This is a strictly contra-Aristotelian negation. We humans cannot perform, think it. It is part of the hypothetical mentality of a mechanical brain, and it indicates the alien thought processes of a SEETEE mind. However, even if we do not use it for our own subjective thought procedures, we can calculate with it and find out how the mechanical brain translates our concept of AND into the conjunction of the SEETEE mind, and by reversal of that process, transposes SEETEE ideas into human concepts. This is first done by combining the two independent negations into one 3-valued table. We notice that does not operate the value 3 and leaves the value 1 as it is. The comprehensive table has therefore the following appearance. If P is true, not P is false, not prime P is 1. If P is 2, not P is 1, not prime P is 3. If P is 3, not prime P is 3. Not P is 3, not prime P is 2. We have written the values which remain invariant with one negator or the other in italics. Now look again at the table of the 3 conjunctions of the mechanical brain. You will find that our human conjunction differs from the SEETEE concepts in all 3 values. That means one or the other negational operator is not enough to effect a transformation of our meaning of AND into the corresponding meaning of the SEETEE world. We shall have to combine both into one single operation. This can be done in 2 ways. So far, we have attached our negations only to positive P. From now on, we shall prefix them to our 2 negated P's. By doing so, we obtain the table. P is 1, not prime P is 2, not prime and not P is 3, and so on and so on. The meaning of this table is that the mechanism first superimposes our thought process, not P, upon the negational pattern of the SEETEE mind, not prime P, and then reverses the situation by starting from our mental range, thereby superimposing the alien pattern of not prime upon our Aristotelian P. Each of these 2 steps results in a rotational shift of all 3 values, as seen from the positive P. Let's take the first step from P to not prime P. The table shows that value 1 becomes 2, then 2 shifts to 3, whereas 3 turns into 1. Instead of representing 2 independent alternatives between 1 or 2 and 2 or 3, the relation of the 3 values of each other represents a cycle that returns clockwise relative to the value position of P. The inverse step establishes by the negational procedure not prime not P results in a counterclockwise shift of the values relative to P, that is, from 1 to 3, from 3 to 2, and from 2 back to 1. These 2 rotating wheels which affect an alternative shift of 3 values represent the very mechanism of a thought translator. This seems to be a brand new idea. Well, maybe for cybernetics, but not for Lewis Carroll. Let's get back to the story of Tweedledum and Tweedledee. After having received your lesson about what logic is, Alice looks at the twins, points her finger at Tweedledum and says, "First, boy," but Tweedledum protests with, "No, how?" When Alice, passing on to Tweedledee, says, "Next, boy," Tweedledee shouts his usual contrary-wise. The meaning is obvious. There is no preference between the 2, as there can be no preference between Aristotelian and contra-Aristotelian way of thinking. But quick-witted Alice gets the point. Consequently, when asked to shake hands, she knows she cannot shake hands with either of the twins first. And, so the story continues, as the best way out of the difficulty she took hold of both hands, each of the twins proffered one at once. The next moment they were dancing around in a ring. After 4 rounds, they left off. 4 times round is enough for one dance, Tweedledum panted out. Carol has probably chosen the number 4 for the following reason. You can effect any circular shift of 3 values by going around in one direction, but when you return to your original position, 4 rings are established. The following figure will demonstrate it. 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2. Ah, that's an interesting interpretation of that. After the original position has been reconstituted, there is no more reason to go around in a ring. Now Alice and the Tweedle twins are figures in a story. This article, on the other hand, deals with problems of logic. We shall therefore retain, for technical reasons, both value shifts to the left as well as to the right, because we are now ready to analyze the basic principle of thought translation. The mechanical brain which rotates the values. This is an operation neither Aristotelian nor the contra-Aristotelian SEETEE mind can perform. Recognizes the fact that both parties, ourselves as well as the aliens, do our thinking as strict alternatives. The first alternative oscillates between 1 and 2, and the second between 2 and 3. But as these alternatives are mutually exclusive and do not overlap, no common ground of communication is possible between them. The thought translator, however, transforms the 2 separate, mutually exclusive alternatives of the Aristotelian and contra-Aristotelian mind into one and only one equally strict alternative by rotating the 3 values either clockwise or counterclockwise. The machine produces, so to speak, its own alternative logic of 2 values. Only the new values are now no longer individual values 1, 2, and 3, which we have used before, but the 2 opposite rotational shifts. These shifts partake necessarily in the human as well as the SEETEE range of thought at the same time. Therefore, they permit the translation of the human concept into the corresponding SEETEE meaning, and also the other way around. We shall demonstrate this now with the help of the meanings of the conjunction and. In doing so, we shall indicate the clockwise rotation by the new symbol R with an arrow, and its reversal R with the opposite arrow. It is then possible to translate the SEETEE concept of and P"Q into the corresponding human reasoning P"Q by the formula P"Q. I forget what the 3 lines mean in logic.
I have no idea.
And I'm not about to look it up. For those of you who are watching, you can see it for yourself. In the SEETEE intelligence, we'll discover our meaning of and by using the inverse formula. Let us see how this is done. We shall use an example of the first of the 2 formulas. A SEETEE intelligence says and P"Q, and the thought translator tells us what the alien thinks is equivalent to the expression R with an arrow, R backwards.
Maybe R forward?
Yeah, R forward, R backwards, P", R backwards, Q. Remember that this symbolic figure contains only our constant of conjunction. Even so, it is not immediately readable for us because the information conveyed to us by the mechanism of the robot brain is still couched in terms of a 3-valued language. In order to understand it, we have to reduce it to a 2-valued expression. The following table will help to do this. Dreivertig, Zweivertig. P"Q to P
Zwei.
and Q.
Zwei.
Zweivertig. Okay. Something tables, symbols.
Dreivertig, Zweivertig.
In our 2-value logic, there is only one conjunction, P and Q, and as the Aristotelian system contains only one value shift, the classical negation, not all 3-valued negations, no matter what form they have, are reduced to it. Therefore, the robotic expression is now reduced to not P and a not Q. The next table shows us what this final formula means and how we obtain its truth value. So if P is true and Q is true for the SEETEE mind, for our mind, not P is 2, not Q is 2. And then for the SEETEE mind, not P and not Q is 2. Oh, wait. Okay, yeah, not P and not Q is 2 is false. And then not P and not Q is true. We first write down the values of positive P and Q. In columns 2 and 3, we have them negated. In column 5, we establish the conjunction of the negated values. In order to do so, we either look up the table for AND, or just remember that AND has the value 1. True only if both the conjugated concepts have the value 1. The final column then results from the negation of column 5. It gives us the final result of what our thought translator has conveyed to us. When we demanded to know what the alien means when he uses the term AND, we see the answer boils down to the following juxtaposition of meanings expressed again in a table. If P is true and Q is true, the Aristotelian AND is true. The contra-Aristotelian AND is true. When P is false and Q is true, the Aristotelian AND is false, and the contra-Aristotelian AND is true. If P is false and Q is true, the Aristotelian AND is false, and the contra-Aristotelian AND is true. If P is false and Q is false, the Aristotelian AND is false, and the contra-Aristotelian AND is false. So, absolute truth and absolute falsehood remain unchanged. It is just partial truth and partial falsehood that gets inverted. Okay, yeah, makes sense. I mean, I don't know why he had to go through all of this. Well, he's working with it. He's a cyberneticist and has to work with formal logic for programming and shit. But just on the Hegelian terms, like linguistically, sure, it works out. All he had to say was, yeah, like it all works out of the original inversion. That for the inversion, for example, like in Hegelianism, the difference of difference is the juxtaposition of the totality of the identity of difference, in which the identity of difference is obviously a contradiction. But that's precisely what identity and difference mean, right? So Hegel has the SEETEE mind, but he also has the method of translating that SEETEE mind back into just regular, intelligible, human mind, according to him. So we don't need a robot third. We don't even need a third value.
You don't need shit. You don't need to do any of this. This is okay. There's this horrible shit I encounter in analytic philosophy, and it's basically, to me, it's like doing a rain dance, where rather than just think the thought, you have to run it through things. Often in a way that doesn't work, but then you get to go, thank God. It was, that made sense. But it was like doing a rain dance. It didn't actually do anything. And in fact, if you look at what he did at the start, where he just, he didn't think about the nature of what it meant for the two statements to be opposite in the first place. He just supposed this third, which he couldn't even qualify, in order to try and bring about this ultimate result. And it was just already there. Mm-hmm. And I don't think the terms he used to try and set it up work.
Yeah.
Rain going off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Like looking at this table, let me try to frame try to think about this conceptually rather than like what he has. Like, okay, let's say one is identity, two is difference. So, if P is identical and Q is identical, the Aristotelian end is they're identical. Okay, so they're identical. The identity remains with identity. Fine. The contra-Aristotelian end should be inverted, as far as I'm concerned. Unless, of course... Wait, no, it actually does work out. Because then for the contra-Aristotelian, the identity just means different. So if the difference is different, it's different. Except, yeah, and then that would be its identity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so
they're already reversing.
Yeah, so it would work out. And so then if P was identical and Q was different, obviously under the term of identity for the Aristotelian and, which is an identical term, it would be false, because they would be different. They wouldn't be identical. But for the contrary Aristotelian, it would be true because then they are different.
Yeah.
And then for it, the difference is identity, so it remains a differential identity. It works out. And then likewise, if you reverse it, it's the same. And then for the P, if P is different and Q is different in the Aristotelian and, they remain different, okay. And for the contrary Aristotelian, the difference means the identity, so it represents it as a difference. Would that work out?
Nicely done.
Yeah. I think it works out. Not entirely sure, but it seems to me like it would follow. Yeah. If the difference was difference, it would be identical. But I'm not. And then, but as identical on its side, it would be different. Therefore, it would accord to the value 2 for us. Yeah. Why are they overcomplicate this shit? Okay, what was it? We shall leave the reader to test the formula. With the same procedure, this formula is the answer what the thought translator would give to a SEETEE person if he or she inquired what the concept is hidden behind the expression p_q, which is the third value. The result would exactly parallel the one we have given above. He or she would also arrive at the conclusion that conjunction and disjunction exchange places if we switch from our Aristotelian mentality and vice versa. And yeah, so the identity and difference example I was using was perfectly parallel as conjunction and disjunction get inverted. Let me conclude this series by showing how you can make a crude model of something that works like a thought translator. You require only a small mirror and a certain amount of imagination. First, write down your value sequences for conjunction and disjunction in a horizontal line from left to right. But instead of using the word true and false for numbers 1 and 2, use different symbols like square and circle. Here it is. One can read that. Then turn your paper with the squares and circles away from you 180 degrees and step before a mirror. Then look at the reflection of your value sequences in the mirror. In order to interpret properly what you see, you now need a bit of imagination. For you, having your Aristotelian mind, the squares, of course, mean 1 true and the circles 2 false. But do not forget, the contrary Aristotelian mind will interpret them in exactly the opposite way. Do not forget this, and look into your mirror with that knowledge in mind. You will then see that your mirror has turned your conjunction into a disjunction for the other mind, and your disjunction appears as his conjunction. Do not try the same experiment with our value sequences written vertically, as they are placed in our tables. It does not work that way, at least not in this simple manner. You want to know why? Well, the trouble is, you are only looking at your mirror. But when Alice met Tweedledum and Tweedledee, she stepped through the looking glass, and you have no idea how much of a difference that made. Well, Gotthard Gunther, according to you, I am an alien. I'm proud of that.
We'd be the machine brain, wouldn't we?
Oh yeah, we're greater than aliens. We are the advanced robot.
We're a double-souled machine. Average Hegelian.
What is it? You know those evolutionary images of man evolving from ape or whatever. You have like Aristotelian man, then like robot man and the Hegelian man at the end. All right, an interesting read. It didn't go where I had wanted it to, because I had read the beginning of this. I'm like, oh, this seems really interesting, and it is interesting as a thought experiment. But I didn't realize that this this might be before like he encountered Hegel, because like there's no way you can encounter Hegel and not realize that this just goes out the window. So I don't know. I'll have to see if I can find any of his later stuff that is explicitly Hegelian and see how he understands Hegel. Because this guy is considered a major guy, at least in German.
Really?
Considerations.
That's interesting. I don't know, the paper, it was cute. That's how it felt.
Well, for us, it may be. For his times, this might have been groundbreaking. For analytics, certainly. For analytics, certainly groundbreaking, still. They can't even get to the SEETEE mind, man, let alone to a hyper-advanced robot mind.
The either or of the understanding.
Okay, like for example, his example of like Alice. I don't get why her shaking both of her hands would be considered a different value, because that's like the and or. Rather than pick one, she picks both, and that's certainly what happens in like speculative logic. You get all the possible combinations depending on what moment you're dealing with.
Yeah.
So you have the moment of identity, if you want to call that true, fine. You get the moment of difference, you want to call that false, fine. Then you get the different difference, the identical identity, the different identity, and the identical difference, all in the totality. So you get the true, true, false, false, true, false, false, true. You get all combinations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're pure relativity to one another.
So, all right. Thanks for joining me. For those of you who listen, I thought this one was interesting. It was a funny enough read. See you around.